so pleased to have you over, Manu. I was just telling Manu that, we probably have exchanged 40 mails over the past 6 or 7 months in a bid to get Manu over to Bangalore, to NIFT Bangalore. He has been zipping in and out of the town at various locations, but so pleased that, we have been able to tag along on your other, events schedule. To give a brief introduction to a man who actually needs no introduction, with 15,000 followers on Twitter and on Instagram. Manu is educated in Fergusson College, Pune, and King's College, London. He was the chief of staff of present MP as well, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, and then later he joined the office of Lord William. He was a research assistant to BBC, and in 2016 he came out with his, what I consider as his magnum opus, Ivory Throne, a book that runs into 700 pages.
704.
704 pages.
Very attached to the extra 4.
704 pages, including the footnotes and, the biblio. 555 written pages, which I accidentally happened to drop on my father, and while reading, and he refused to talk to me for 2 days. But the good thing was that, he picked it up, and, this copy that I have here is thumbed by 3 generations, because it's such a riveting book that you have written on the Travancore royal family. And in 2017, for this work, he was awarded the Sahitya Academy Yuva Puraskar Award. And the very next year, he came out with his next book, which is Rebel Sultans. And then this year, he has come out with Kotisan, the Mahatma, and Italian Brahmins. So, it's such a pleasure to have you over, a historian who has been prolific in the past 3-4 years to have churned out. So I would start off with, your student days. I would want to touch upon your student days briefly, and to ask you what whetted your appetite towards history, and then meander to writing it too. I would have imagined that as a good South Indian boy, you were pressurized to studying science, and I want to ask, why not an engineer?
Well, luckily I had parents who were not very good South Indians in that sense. They let me do what I wanted. And actually, it was a little bit of a khichdi of an upbringing, really. On the one hand, I was sent off. We were not allowed to watch TV, so we grew up watching these old BBC series from the 60s and 70s, which made for a very interesting view of the world. We had these little piano lessons and things like that, and that was the kind of life we led in Pune initially. And then there was no pressure as such. There was a vague sense initially, because relatives would say, oh my God, if you're not going into science, it's the end of the world. But then I was quite fixed that I didn't want to go into science. And so even though I had a very, very good score in science, I was quite determined to go into the arts. The history happened essentially because of family gossip. There's no other way to put it. Every time we'd go off to Kerala, and I was in my teens, I have this grandmother who's got an extraordinary capacity to tell stories, full of irreverence, full of detail, and full of the most colorful anecdotes from our own past. So, for instance, we'd go, and usually you'd imagine grandmothers tell you stories from the epics, and there's a nice moral science lesson at the end of it, where you're taught honesty and sincerity and things like that. But my grandmother instead gave me plenty of this family stuff, where once, for instance, we went on a walk, and she was happily pointing out houses where her uncle had fathered illegitimate children. And I was like, wow, interesting, this is in the, a century before me, there was this man doing this with his little veena, and, he's a Bhagavatar, he was a big singer and all of that. And he happily littered the entire village with illegitimate children. My great-great-grandmother was a divorcee in the 1880s. Now, she was an upper caste lady, knew Sanskrit, very orthodox in that, in every other sense. But that's one thing that struck me, which is that everywhere else, at least in the textbooks we studied, women were always these victims who needed to be rescued by social reformers. So widow remarriage was a great reform. They had to, sati, of course, there was that famous thing in the 19th century. So it was always victims and the reform and the men coming in to sort of save the women and give them an education and all of that. And here I was listening to my own great-great-grandmother's story in the 1880s, where she discarded one husband and took another. And he was a divorcee in his own right with a son from an earlier marriage. Their kids also had, multiple marriages like this. It was perfectly normal at the time. And I was fascinated. I said, one thing that I study in school in Pune is this. And then I come back to my own ancestors, and this is what I'm hearing. Yeah. That sort of provoked a general interest in people from the past. The idea that, the notion that our ancestors are all sitting was thinking chaste thoughts all day long, some sort of ultra pious existence where everything they did was pure and wonderful, and we're supposed to learn from them and feel overawed by them. That's not true. They were people of flesh and blood. They had their desires, they had their weaknesses, they had their hanky-pankies. They did a bunch of things we don't need to be embarrassed about. It doesn't take away from their greatness. There's in the first book, there's a character called Kerala Varma Vaidyavathamran. He's considered the father of Malayalam literature. And he's called the Kalidas of Kerala because he's such a big Sanskrit scholar. Now, the interesting thing about him is that in the course of my research, I found an 1870s letter by him where he cheerfully admits to, being, at one point, addicted to marijuana and bhang. Okay. And this is the time he's in his late 20s when he's writing this. And in my head, I was like, father of Malayalam literature, Kalidas of Kerala, you put him on a pedestal. Yeah. But in his 20s, he's like any other kid today. Like today, kids smoke weed. Then in the 1870s, a kid was smoking weed. There's no big deal there. And when nobody's sitting in judgment, it doesn't take away from his greatness the fact that when he was a young man, he did what young people do even today. Yeah. So this connection that I felt, if you look at the past through the eyes of the people who were there, without judgment, without imposing your own prejudices on them, the past comes alive in a completely different fashion. Yeah. And everything we think we are negotiating now afresh, it's not really true. Patterns have always recurred in the past, and these people have always had to negotiate it as well. So I think that, this interest and appetite in discovering people from the past led me to the past itself. And that's how the whole thing began. Even the first book is woven through the life of the last Maharani of Travancore and the court politics around her. The second book is woven through all these sultans and their personal eccentricities and quirks and their ambitions and achievements and weaknesses. And the third also, I highlight several individuals from the past. Who not only complicate our understanding of the past, but also our understanding of people back then and how they lived.
Yeah. But how did the publishing part happen?
It was actually, I've heard of people having some rather nightmarish experiences. In my case, I sent them an email. Yeah. The only thing I strategically timed was the time I sent the email. I sent the editor an email at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that when she woke up in the morning, my email would be the top thing in her inbox. And it worked that way. By 11 the next day, I had my reply. And they were happy with what they read. So then they asked for the whole manuscript. That's how
Ivory. Okay. So you're a curious mix of a historian plus someone who has worked in the political offices of both Shashi Tharoor here in India, as well as Lord Bilimoria. How much, and Dr. Tharoor himself is an author, and he is what shall we say? He is been actively involved in your book launches and in your endorsements and things like that. How much has he influenced you, and how was that experience of working with Dr. Kujjur and then?
There's no direct influence in terms of the writing because, like he himself says, like his sons, I also keep a distance from revealing too much of my work where he's concerned. Partly because you don't want to be, you don't want people to misunderstand that you're growing in this person's shade, and that's somehow helping you. So it's good to keep an arm's length. Yeah. But one thing that's definitely influenced me is that I was 21 when I worked with him for the first time.
Yeah. And how did that happen? How did you make it?
Very randomly. I just finished my master's in London. So I'd done one cycle of research for my book there. Yeah. And I needed to be in Delhi for my next cycle at the National Archives. So I was fixed on the fact that I had to find a job in Delhi. Yeah. So in London airport, I was boarding the Bombay flight and I saw him boarding the Delhi flight. And I said, I know this person, I'm going to write him an email. Okay. So I wrote him an email out of the blue. And 21, what is your CV? Emptiness, there's nothing there. Okay. So, but he liked the way I wrote. Right. So he just said, I really like the way you write the way you wrote your letter. And then he asked me to come see him in Trivandrum, where I met him in the middle of a public event where he was coming down a staircase, I was going up, and he said, oh, your man, go up and there's a sadhya happening, so go eat a nice Kerala feast first, and then come down and we'll talk. Right. So the first time I met him, I sat there, had a nice big sadhya in the middle of a lot of, older ladies and children and all of that. Yeah. And then came down and he offered me an internship, and then in a combination of luck and timing, when I went there to join, within 3 or 4 weeks, the guy managing the office left. Yeah. And I was bumped up to run the entire parliamentary office. Yeah. And there was no looking back, I suppose. Okay. That was fun.
And how was your, and if you would juxtapose that experience with your work in UK with Lord Bilimoria, how would you juxtapose it?
The Indian experience was, I think, more challenging in an interesting way because here there's no, when you do something, there's no guarantee the results will come. Yeah. Because there's so much bureaucracy, there's so many people you could deal with. On the phone, people would, take me very seriously. But then I'd, say something, and I'd say, I'll come and meet you, say, in Parliament or one of these government offices. And when you go there, they look at me and they're like, oh, you're a slip of a boy. They're not going to give me that much respect. So they feel embarrassed that they're giving me so much respect over the phone. And then they see a young person and that causes some sort of ego clash and all of that.
Right.
But that said, it was still a challenge. It was fun. It was interesting because no one day was similar. You were dealing with diplomats, you were dealing with NGOs, you were dealing with journalists, petitions from a woman who had gone off to Dubai to work as a maid but was actually enslaved by her person there, trying to repatriate this lady, dealing with petitions that people from Trivandrum were sending, following up with government ministries. At 21, having to deal with that was really fun. I enjoyed it very much. I only left because, in 2012 he was made a minister again.
Right.
So I think we got to know in August that he'd be made a minister in October. So I left by the end of the month for the simple reason that then your colleagues, the IAS officers, would come in and take the best parts of the job. Okay. And I was running the show till then, and I don't want to be relegated as the third PA or something. So I said, well, I'll go back to London. And anyway, I needed to go back to my next cycle of research in London. So then I found a job at the House of Lords, went and did that gig there. Then the BEC thing happened.
And how was that gig with the
that was also fun. That was.
It's far more predictable and ordered.
There, if you give an order, it happens.
Yeah.
So there's less unpredictability.
Right.
But having worked in the Indian system, that can also feel a little less challenging. Like you can feel, you almost get frustrated with the ease with which things happen there. Like, why is it happening so easily? One wants a little bit of drama and fun, but none of that there. But there are other ways in which to benefit from that experience.
Right.
Unlike the Indian Parliament, for example, in the British Parliament they have bars, and you can go privately. Not anymore, I think, but we were allowed to take beer bottles up to under the Big Ben on the terrace and have little parties up there. So all of that was possible in those days. Now I think they've closed all that. And the lesson I learned is the Indian Parliament also needs a bar established inside it.
Okay, so I ask this question because I constantly try and tell the young people that they should engage with politics and they should engage with institutional forms of governance as well, because at the end of the day, the variety of roles that you get to perform and the challenges, the thinking on the feet that you do is immense, which is unparalleled. So I hope, it is, the scholarship apart, this brief stint that you've had with the political officers is also an inspiration to me.
It also tells you a lot about the way things work in general. So one thing it really develops is patience. Because you go to Parliament and you see the kind of backroom works. Of course, in Parliament, everyone's yelling at each other, throwing paper planes and chips and screaming.
That's modest.
That's because
it's not only paper planes that they throw at each other.
Correct, but I'm being generous and kind. No, but that's because they have cameras there. Because there are cameras, everybody is grandstanding. But where there are no cameras, the backroom work that happens, the committee meetings that happen, the negotiations that happen on, party A support party B on a certain bill. Party B will extract another favor from party A. So there's this constant building of consensus and compromise and all of that happens. And that teaches you so much about patience. It teaches you that there's no, we live in the age of Twitter and social media where we'll all sit with our sticks saying, I am right, and if you're not, it's my way or the highway. So this is the right way to think, this is the right way to behave, etc. But that shows you how much depends on getting people on board, persuading them, building consensus and compromise. And for me, I think that was a good thing to see at a relatively early age because it develops a certain patience and sympathy. And I don't immediately, call out people as evil or bad or just sort of lampoon them for their beliefs. Because you see, in a place like Parliament, you see everything. All kinds of people, all streaks of thought and political ideology, and they all find a way to coexist and actually manage some sort of legislation. Super slow, it's super frustrating, but it happens at the end of the day. That form of building consensus is really something I think that was good to see.
So, the fact that you were with the former MP who was with the Congress party, and which is not exactly the ruling party at this point.
Not at all. It's not even not
exactly.
And
then, to be a historian at the same time, was there ever a danger of being identified with one can? And then the sheer instrumentality of history to serve a political purpose, was that a dichotomous situation?
That happens even now. The thing is, if you don't agree with a majoritarian project for whatever reason, you're immediately branded a leftist or a whatever. That happens now. You can't escape. But frankly, the one good thing is the people who brand you like this on social media are not the ones who read anyway. So they're not affecting your reading constituency. So I've learned not to respond to it, but to ignore it. That's better. But I see lots of parallels with history. There's this empire called Vijayanagar. Now, when Vijayanagar collapses, most people present Vijayanagar's collapse as this bunch of Muslim sultans come and destroy Vijayanagar forever and it collapses. In reality, the empire carried on for a lot more, several decades, about 7 decades longer. And the final king of Vijayanagar, of the Aravidu dynasty, the 4th dynasty, essentially becomes an emperor without a kingdom. Not because the whole thing has collapsed, but because his own governors, his own subordinates, the Nayakas of Tanjore, Ginji and Madurai and the Vodayas in Mysore, they all become independent rulers and they stop believing very much in the emperor. And the emperor goes to the Mughals saying, will you help me put my own provincial governors in place? The provincial governors go to the Qutub Shah of Golconda and the Adil Shah of Bijapur saying, come help us get rid of our emperor. So much for this Hindu-Muslim conflict people construct, it wasn't like that. There were plenty of alliances across religion and across divides. And you see a little bit of that in the Congress party now, which is that it was this grand edifice, but it's become now a collection of factions. Everybody is, sort of looking out only for themselves. And on the top, the edifice still exists in theory. There's still an umbrella, there's still a family on top, there's all of that happening. But like all empires, it's like the heyday is over. Now your own subordinates are the ones fighting and destabilizing and all of that. And it's just a decline that is not easy to reverse. Because
but then there would be a turn of wheels, so to speak, as history would help us to recognize the pattern. There would be a turn of wheels and stuff. Things are bound to go up and down.
Yeah, but I don't see this party resurrecting itself in the same way. It's just that the age of decline of the current ruling party will also come in due course. So, and perhaps faster than we think, because now in the age of technology, things happen very fast.
Okay. I was trying to juxtapose your experience between the East and the West, and having broached that binary of East and West. History operates itself through a lot of binaries, and Hindu versus Muslim, North versus South, Dravidian versus Aryan. Which is your pet peeve? What do you hate most?
Today, just as binaries, no simplistic answers are possible. Everything is complicated. Human beings are complicated. Human society is complicated. That's just how the world worked. It was a little bit like that in the past. So we now like to project our anxieties, our prejudices, our view of the world onto the past to try and milk the past to support our argument. But in reality, the past existed on its own terms. It wasn't a black and white world. Now, often what happens in history is people say that it was either a clash of religions, all the religions sort of hated each other and they were fighting each other all the time. Or it's the other extreme where ultra-leftists will say it was absolutely syncretic. People were holding hand in hand and jumping around a garden of paradise. But it wasn't either. The fact is somewhere in the middle, where basically the way kings worked is their self-image, their legitimacy, their identity came from religion. So they would bump religion for whatever would legitimize them. So their self-image was always expressed in Sanskritic terms if you were a Hindu, in Persian Islamic terms if you were a Muslim. But in reality, once that formal self-image is done, the actual negotiation of power is much more practical. So with the Vijayanagar Empire, the final defeat by the sultans happens in 1565. Everybody says Muslim sultans come destroy Hindu empire. In reality, the emperor of Vijayanagar, who's fighting there, the de facto emperor, he began his life, his career as a nobleman of the Qutub Shah of Golconda. The Qutub Shah who was at that battle, fighting the Vijayanagar army, he spent 7 years in exile, not in any of the other Muslim courts, but in Vijayanagar, where he picked up Telugu, married a Telugu woman, patronized poetry on the Mahabharata, and changed his name from Ibrahim to Abhirama. That was his trajectory. The Adil Shah of Bijapur was fighting Vijayanagar till a few years before. He was the adopted son of the Vijayanagar emperor, because they were on very good terms still then. The Nizam Shah who was fighting Vijayanagar was descended from a Brahmin, and not only did he have Brahmin blood, and after conversion to Islam, their family also married black women from Africa and Persian women. So this is a family that has black and Persian and Hindu blood. The Adil Shahs are a mix of Persian blood and Maratha blood. The Qutub Shahs are from Iraq originally, but again married to lots of Telugu women. It's an extremely mixed up sort of scenario. There are 6,000 Marathas fighting at the Battle of Talikota in 1565. They're fighting for the Sultans. Ainul-Mulk Gilani, one of the greatest generals of the time, is a Muslim, but he's fighting for the Vijayanagar emperor. And as I said, Vijayanagar didn't collapse there. They shifted capitals. The city in Hampi was sacked, but the capital moved. Eventually to Chandragiri, but several places, one after the other. And the empire survived for a lot of time. It collapsed when its own subordinates stabbed it in the back, not because of the invasions of the Sultan. That dance had been going on for a very long time. And you find constantly, therefore, that this black and whiteization starts in the colonial period, and then we decide to internalize it, and we start looking at everything through the lens of that. It isn't to say that religion didn't have any sort of value. Religion did. People's self-image came from that. But it wasn't communal in the sense we know it today. For example, Shivaji, he comes up with the concept of a Hindavi Swaraj. He wants to purge Persian words. He creates the Raj Vyavahar Kosha. He wants Sanskrit words to be used more. He writes diplomatic letters in Sanskrit. He wanted to create a Hindavi kingdom built on Hindu Brahminical ideals. That is true. But his own father and uncle, their name was Shahji and Sharifji. Now his grandparents didn't have children for a long time. And in a poem Shivaji himself commissioned, it tells how the grandparents went to a Sufi saint called Shah Sharif. Then they had two sons. They named one son Shahji, the other son Sharifji. Because on the ground, where the masses were concerned, when a holy man came, it didn't matter whether he was wearing a skull cap or saffron robes. He was a holy man. Everybody flocked, regardless of whatever their leanings were. It was at elite levels where kings and dynasties and that came into the picture, that religion was used as an instrument of legitimacy, as an instrument of self-expression. Today we use nationalism, but in those days there was no nationalism. The other thing, the book is called The Courtesan, the Mahatma, and the Italian Brahmin. The courtesan represents the idea of women and how important it is, especially in 2019. Why are we still looking at history through kings and battles and empires? Where are the women? And the thing is, courtesans are fascinating there because courtesans were literate women. They were women of culture. They were women who made active contributions to society. And even there, some of their work, the Bhakti women, the women of the Bhakti movement, in their poetry, you have two options. Mirabai, you can look at her as a Krishna Bhakta and say, wow, bhajans she was singing all day long, what a sweet, devout woman. Or you can also focus on the fact that she was the one who said, I will not commit sati. She was the one who stood up to all norms of Rajput patriarchy and said, no, I will not live like you expect widows to live. She finally went out, she would meet men, she would meet sages, all of that. And she said, this is my freedom, this is something I want to do. And finally she walks out of the palace. Now, her expression may have been in the vocabulary of religion, but the ideas were not merely devotional. They were not merely religious. They were also expressing polemical, radical thought for the time. She doesn't appear in this particular collection, but there's a poet called Janabai, who was a kitchen maid. And there's this lovely poem she begins where she says, God, won't you be a darling and kill my mother-in-law? God, won't you be a good God and kill my father-in-law while you're at it? And then she finally adds her sister-in-law to the list of people to murder. And her idea is that this domestic drudgery, being seen as, like her fertility is used as though she becomes a center of family. And the chains of family sort of keep her there. In reality, she wasn't married. Now that's the interesting thing. She's expressing that frustration with domesticity that's imposed on her. Another poem, she says that, God, to find you, I'll become a slut. And these are the actual lyrics that this woman's come up with. Now the point is she's basically saying the slut or the harlot or the bazaar woman has the freedom to walk out and express herself in the way she wants, that she's sort of craving to be that person. Unlike Mirabai, Janabai actually never walks out. But there are plenty of cases of courtesans, of women in the Bhakti literature who are actually expressing themselves through God, but the ideas are not really God. The other reason why we need to look at courtesans is also the sheer amount of contribution. One of the characters in the book is a lady called Begum Samru. Begum Samru begins life in the mid-18th century as a dancing girl in Delhi. A few years later, when she's a young woman, she meets a German mercenary and his army of some 7,000-8,000 people. She becomes this German mercenary's lover. When he dies, not only does she take over the army, she pushes out his actual legitimate son and claims the loyalty of the men herself. Then when the Mughal emperor is besieged in Delhi on two occasions, it's Begum Samru who rides to the defense of Delhi and relieves the Mughal emperor of his enemies in Delhi. The Mughal emperor styles her daughter of, the daughter of the Mughal court and pillar of the empire. She converts to Christianity. In the middle, she marries, she has an affair with an Irishman. Then she marries a Frenchman. Her troops hate this particular Frenchman, so they tie her to a gun carriage, have a mutiny, and leave her to rot in the sun for an entire week. She bounces back, claims the loyalty of her troops again, becomes an ally. Once Shah Alam, the emperor, dies, she becomes an ally of the East India Company. And in 1835, she dies one of the richest women in North India, whose fortune is still unclaimed, by the way. There's a website where you can go and apply if you want to claim fortune. But you have to show that you're descended from her German first husband. Anyway, so the point is, she was a woman who made history. She was a woman who defended Delhi. She was a woman who went from dancing girl to richest woman, who had her court, became a Christian, which was very unusual at the time. And the thing is, why is she not part of our history? Her contemporary Maharji Scindia came from very impoverished origins. His father was a slipper carrier for the Peshwa. But his story is presented as some sort of, something to be proud of. He came from nowhere and did so much. But because Begum Samru was a dancing girl, there's this stigma attached to her, which is, she wasn't virtuous. That Mangal Sutra policing her body wasn't there. She wasn't a family woman. Therefore, she's not worth that attention. But in reality, she was a contributor. There's a Devdasi in Kumbakonam called Balamani. In the late 19th century, Balamani sets up, when most Indian women are still illiterate, Balamani sets up a private limited drama company where she employs destitute women, employs women affected by anti-Devdasi legislation, makes it a highly successful commercial venture. Like Kings of Yore, she renovates temples, makes endowments, gives donations, all of that. But unlike Kings, nobody tells her story because Balamani was unmarried, because she was a Devadasi. And because of that, there's this Malayali figure called Swadesham Bhimani Ramakrishna Pillai, great champion of press freedom because he stood up for the press and all of that. There's a scene where Balamani comes to Trivandrum and the Divan, the Prime Minister of Travancore, puts a necklace around her neck in public as a sort of token of honor. And this man has this big op-ed saying, my God, your ministers used to be great people, now you're sort of venerating this public woman like this and all of that. If it was a man and who they were putting a garland on, it wouldn't have been an issue. But because it was Balamani, she was a woman and she was a Devadasi, that became a problem. But she made history, she made contributions to history. And that has been expunged and that's been forgotten. And this is a constant throughout. In the second book, and in fact in an essay in the second book she's a footnote, but in this she's a full essay. There's this Begum called Kunza Humayun in Ahmednagar. She was a real force behind her husband, Hussain Nizam Shah, who was ruling in Ahmednagar. So much so that one of the, this is probably apocryphal, but there in legend and a certain literary work, where it says that one of the reasons he went to war against Vijayanagar was because Vijayanagar sent him a letter saying, give us tribute, so many diamonds, so many heaps of pearls, etc. And to the list was added Begum Kunza Humayun's anklets, which was an insult to her. Right. So her husband goes out and defeats Vijayanagar. But the thing is, she then rules as regent for her son after her husband's death for 6 years. The son, when he becomes king, he's so resentful of his mother and the shadow she sort of casts because she's such a towering figure. Not only is she expunged from the record, she's also painted out of paintings. There are miniature paintings from his father's time, from the time she was in power, where you can still see the man, you can still see the attendants behind them, but where there used to be Kunza, now there's a giant blob. So basically women were not just written out of history, they were sometimes even painted over in miniature paintings. But going out there and finding them is important because the women are there. And even at the heights of patriarchy, the women have managed to stand up and fight. There's one of the essays in this is on Tete-a-tete Savitri, or Datri as she's known in Kerala. We talk about Me Too today. And this is iconic, this 1905 case. Nambudri Brahmin women in Kerala had no freedom. They were pretty much the only women in Parda in Kerala. Even Muslim women didn't have Parda in Kerala. But Nambudri Brahmin women had. They were not allowed to obtain a proper education. They weren't allowed to read. Definitely no such things as newspapers. They were considered scandalous. And Tete-a-tete, and they were police. They were not allowed to go anywhere, etc. Tete-a-tete is at the age of 23 in 1905. She's discovered having an affair with somebody. So then there's this big trial. How can a Brahmin woman have an affair, etc. She says, fine, try me, but you must also try the man. Yeah. So they think, fine, one lover of hers, what's the big deal? But once they agree to the trial, and they agree to her terms to also excommunicate the man, Tete-a-tete Savitri produces a list of 66 men that she's had affairs with in her 23 years of existence. And 2 of them are already dead, and 64 people are actually found guilty, and this includes people across the board. The star, we didn't have film stars then, but there was this Kathakali star called Kavangal Shankara Panikar. She had dealings with him. There was a mahoot, there were 2 mahoots, she had dealings with them in her own household. Her own father, her own brother-in-law who had sexually abused her at the age of 10. People say sexual abuse is a new thing because of Western influence. It's a good way to make yourself feel good. It existed always. At 10 years old, her future brother-in-law touching her was sexual abuse. So her father, her brother-in-law, assorted grandees of the time. In fact, the story goes that after the 64th name, the Kochi Maharaja suspended the trial because he said this is absolutely scandalous, enough is enough. And the story goes his was the next name, which is why the trial was suspended. But this was the first such episode recorded in the press. And the press, these men were all given a chance to cross-interrogate her. Little did they realize that not only had she kept a list of their names, she kept evidence in the sense that based on what festival was happening, then she remembered when she had her dealings with one man. She remembered where somebody had a mole, somebody had a wart. She remembered marks on their bodies. All of this she had kept. And the result was, not only was she excommunicated, all these 64 men also had to leave. And that was something, people now cast her as some sort of goddess of revenge and all of that. Whether she did it consciously or not, the point is at some level she decided, I'm going to be Court Pandey. When I'm going down, I'm taking down these men with me, no matter who they are. And this is when Kerala society really shook, because Nambudris were extremely powerful. They were not like Tamil Brahmins, for example, who went out and worked and they had jobs. Nambudris never worked. They were landlords. They didn't have to work. So that aura, that facade of greatness, one woman's act, one woman's list of 66 names, just like lists that moved about on Twitter last year, that one list completely smashed that, and that's where reform starts within the Nambudri community. Within the community, younger men and the women start asking questions. They say, we can't continue like this. But even when it was a sort of hotbed of patriarchy, for example, most communities, when the women had their monthly periods, they were asked to sit in a separate room because they were not considered pure and they were not considered proper to go into the kitchen, etc. Devaki Neliyangot, who's Nambudri, she talks about her family where they were not allowed to read, they were not allowed newspapers, etc. The one place where they could read newspapers and catch up on all the news and consume contraband was in the menstruation room. Because there none of the men came, none of the brothers and fathers came there. So they'd get a supply of reading material in the menstruation room. But all the same, while they were twisting this temple of patriarchy on its own head and sort of using it for their own purposes, they were still Brahmin women, so they felt a little embarrassed about touching books when they were menstruating. They said Saraswati and all of that.
Right.
So they had a special maid to turn the pages for them.
Okay.
But the point is, even when there was this enforced patriarchal sort of system established by men, and these women had no option but to live by that, they still found ways to flout the norm.
Right.
And that's the point. You go throughout Indian history. Our ancestors were not all sitting with their spines erect and thinking chaste thoughts all day long. They were standing up and asking questions. The Mahatma in the title does not refer to Gandhiji, it refers to Mahatma Phule. We blandly called him a social reformer and put him away, thinking that's it. But this was a man who in Pune, which was the most orthodox city in Western India, Brahmins, it was the seat of Brahmanism in Western India, where they say the Brahmins are superior because they were born from the head of the cosmic creator. Phule is the one who turns around and asks, does that mean the cosmic creator menstruates through the mouth? Right. It was scandalous to say something like that in the 19th century. Before him in the 15th century, Kabir says that, if the cosmic creator's head is where you all came from, does that mean you were delivered through the ear? Right. Go a few centuries earlier, in the 12th century, Basava says, loaded with the weight of the Vedas, the Brahmin is a veritable donkey. The thing is, it's not about hating on Brahmins, but these are custodians of a discriminatory order. Yes. All throughout Indian history, there have always been people who stood up and asked inconvenient questions. Right. That is also part of our tradition. Asking questions and polemical thought and radical thought is also part of our tradition.
Argumentative Indian.
That we should never forget. And this notion that protecting culture means just obeying and sort of conforming to whatever's fed to you, that is not true. There were always people who had a radical bent of mind. And finally, of course, the Italian Brahmin refers to human eccentricity and quirk. Because human beings, again, you think of kings and emperors and all these people and you think that they were just living in palaces, some sort of completely abnormal life. Yeah. There's an essay on Jahangir. Jahangir is, we think emperor on the peacock throne sitting up and giving decrees all day long. Yeah, but he was a man with such curiosity. Anything you put in front of him, he wanted to measure. So once he saw a rather large watermelon, he wanted to measure it. Somewhere he went and they said, oh, this is a bottomless lake. He said, no, I will send in divers to measure the actual depth of the lake. Someone brought him a zebra once and he was convinced this was a horse with paint on it, so he had it washed 20-30 times to see if the colors would wear off. On his way somewhere, he once saw a large, giant spider strangling a snake, and he stopped his entire procession to basically watch how this was happening. Another time, there was a snake that was swallowing a rabbit. He stopped and he's trying to get to watch this, and the snake is just like bewildered, like why am I suddenly surrounded by so many people? So the snake stops swallowing the rabbit. He now orders the rabbit to be stuffed into the snake's mouth, with the result that both the animals end up dying. So and best is of course when once he's out somewhere in camp, and the English ambassador comes to see him, and he's told that the emperor's gone out somewhere, around the camp. And suddenly in the evening, the lights are all turned down really, like nobody can see very clearly. Why is that the case? Because the Emperor Jahangir and his favorite wife, Noor Jahan, had decided that they would go out on a bullock cart with the emperor whipping the bullocks and all of that. And that's how they came back into camp. The Badshah and the Empress of India on a bullock cart. And this scandalized the English emperor. The point is, they were curious. They were people who had fun. They had a sense of humor. And they were able to do parody as well. The second essay in the book is on this Maratha prince who writes that parody of the caste system. So he's a Maratha, he's Shivaji's nephew. He's the Maratha who's ruling in Tanjore. In Tanjore, his people are Tamilians. His army is manned by Rajputs and Bundelas and Afghans and so on. He's a Marathi speaker. His mother tongue is Marathi, but his court language is Telugu. So he writes a play called the Satidana Suramu in Telugu, and this was performed in public. The protagonist of this particular play is a man called Morupatlu the Magnificent, who's a Brahmin on his way to a temple festival. On the way, he sees a very beautiful woman in the distance. So he tells his disciple, I must go flirt with her. Disciple says, no, you're a Brahmin, Shastra, Dharma, Artha, all of that. The man says, no, I don't want this insipid eternal bliss. I want the bliss that comes with spending one evening with this lady. So then they go to the lady, and the lady turns around and she's an untouchable. So first she says, no, I'm married. He says, no, but give me your loins as you would give a Brahmin land. Then she's like, how to get rid of this particular stalker. So she starts spouting Dharma, Artha, philosophy, all of that. Man refuses to budge. Finally, she says, we drink liquor, we eat beef, so we're not pure enough for you. And the man says, we drink cow's milk and we worship the cow. If you eat the whole cow, you must be purer than me. Now the thing is, this is being said by a Maratha Raja. This is being performed as a play in public in the early 18th century. That's when this is happening. Today, if a writer were to have a dialogue like this in their book, you can imagine the kind of scandal it would cause. The difference is that then they had the cultural confidence to be able to lampoon themselves, to parody themselves, to turn social conventions on its head, and to laugh at themselves. Today, that insecurity means that humor is not allowed. You have to put your ancestors on a pedestal, you have to put historical figures on a pedestal, treat them as though they were gods, and they could never do anything wrong. But that's not the truth. Human beings are human beings, they're never gods. And that's what I'm trying to convey through the Italian Brahmin, which is, the title itself reflects this Italian who shows up in Madurai to convert people. And of course, he initially realizes the only people converting are lower caste people. And he says, no, I want the Brahmins to convert. So this Italian from Montepulciano, he starts wearing saffron robes. He acquires a sacred thread like a Brahmin, learns Telugu, Tamil, Sanskrit, starts debating Brahmins, starts teaching the Bible as a kind of lost Veda, a fifth Veda. And most curiously, at one point, his colleagues there, who's a Jesuit, a nice padre who's 15 years older than him, he tells this man, oh, I can't eat with you anymore because now I'm a Brahmin, you're a lower caste person, you're a Mlecha, so you have to eat your food separately, I have to eat my food separately. His superiors in Goa summon him angrily to ask questions, and he goes there and refuses to eat even with them. And he becomes an Italian Brahmin, and he lives about 20-25 years in this place. Manages to convert about 5,000 people by the end of his career, including a prince, including very many Brahmins. And his form of this Hinduized Catholicism still has remnants in the way Tamil Catholics practice their faith. And that's just fascinating to think that in the 17th century there was an Italian going around as a sannyasi with the sacred sanctified water and sitting only on tiger skin and leopard skin and things like that, and being received everywhere with people washing his feet and all of that, because it was possible then. This notion of insider, outsider, us versus them, these are creations largely of the 19th century the way we know it today. They also at some point had their us and them at an elite level, but not at the mass level. The coming of a white man claiming to be a sannyasi was another new white man, another new figure who's coming to and being a holy man. There's nothing special about it. So that's the other thing I'm trying to communicate through the book, that Indian history is populated by people who challenge our notion of what people in the past were like, how they acted, how they thought, and how they went about their business. Because they were curious, interesting people.
Right. The fixity that one attributes to caste, is also largely a remnant of colonialism in itself. In the fascinating essay that you have of William Jones again, there is this constant give and take in how one navigates through this purpose. When he wants a translation to be made, nobody is willing to cooperate with him. And the rituals that one goes through it, that the Brahmin would teach him, but he would wash the entire can you recount that story?
The William Jones is this very interesting man. He's one of the earliest Orientalists who came to India and sets up this Asiatic society. On the one hand, the Orientalists made great contributions in the sense that we had forgotten about, for example, Emperor Ashoka. Indians had forgotten entirely that this man existed. It was the Orientalists who discovered that all these different inscriptions in different places, after they brought all these places under their political control, it was easier for them to make sense of all these inscriptions and say, hold on, Ashoka was your emperor, and this was one man's inscriptions on all these places. They're the ones who connect standard quarters of the Greek records with Chandragupta Maurya. They're the ones who connected, in that sense, Indian history to world history as it was evolving there. It came with its own politics. So, for instance, William Jones is the one who translated the story of Shakunthala, the Kalidas story. So when we talk about Shakunthala today, most people know the Kalidas Shakunthala, which is basically Dushyanta comes to the ashram. Shakuntala is there with her maids, etc. Dushyanta says, oh, you woman of lovely thighs, lie with me. Shakuntala is all hee, ha, ha, ha. Her maids talk to her, and she doesn't talk, she's very coy. They have a Gandharva Vivaha, which makes up for lack of patience and ritual. And he finally gives her a ring, saying, when you come to see me, bring the ring, etc. One day, Sage comes, her head is in the clouds. Sage curses her, saying, the man you're thinking about will forget you. And her maids come running, saying, Ayo, Pavam, she didn't mean it, etc. So again, he says, fine, when the man sees the ring, he'll remember everything. Of course, the ring goes missing on the way, a fish swallows it, all that happens. So when she shows up in court, the king doesn't recognize her, she weeps, her mother takes her away, that's how the story goes. And then, of course, he finds the ring and he remembers. But this is not the original Shakuntala. This is Kalidas' Shakuntala, which came much later. The original Shakuntala of the epics, it's a very different story. The broad outline is the same, but what happens is Dushyanta comes, oh, buxom lady, sleep with me. Shakuntala says, fine, but my son must be your heir. So before this happens, before this transaction is executed, she extracts from him a promise. So she's not a coy woman, she has no maid, nothing. She looks him in the eye and talks to him. There's no ring, there is no curse, there is no sage in the original Shakuntala. She has a 36-month pregnancy, don't ask me how. And at the end of it, she has this child. She takes the child to Dushanta's court. And there again, no maid, nothing. She talks to him. She asks him to honor his pledge. Dushanta deliberately lies. Because he thinks that if some random woman walks into my court with a baby and if I acknowledge it in public, what will my people think about me? And Shakuntala doesn't cry and run away or go into exile or something. She stands there and she says, even without you, my son will be lord of all three worlds. You rule the earth, I fly the skies, because she's of celestial origins. So she gives it back to him. And then, of course, there's a magical voice from the heavens that tells Dushanta, you better agree to accept the reality as it is. And he says, oh yes, yes, I was just lying because of these reasons. And Shakuntala, I forgive you for your harsh words, as if she's the one who needs forgiveness. But anyway, the point is that Shakuntala is a much more forthright Shakuntala. The Kalidas Shakuntala is what really appealed to William Jones. So he translates it into Shakuntala, the Fatal Ring, or the Fatal Ring. This goes on to be performed in Germany as a play. It goes on to become a sensation in England. It becomes like this main cultural sort of gem that's discovered in the West. And that is what comes back to us in our textbooks. So, funnily enough, our notion of Shakuntala is what William Jones translated. Yeah. And in the translation, he also sanitized things. Yeah. So, there's one line, for instance, where Shakuntala is upset. So, her face is sad, her shoulders are drooping, and her breasts are sagging. Now, he's included the face and the shoulders, but he's completely cut out the breasts. Yeah. Because for his Western audience, he thought that was too scandalous. Yeah. So, this not only is it the later version of Shakuntala, it's also sanitized, almost Victorianized version of Shakuntala that's come back to us. And we have now internalized her as the ideal of Indian womanhood. But she's actually a hybrid. She's not merely the original Shakuntala or even the full Kalidas Shakuntala. So William Jones on the one hand made contributions, but on the other hand there was also politics of translation that affected the way this comes. Which is why good historians will never take any text at face value. To begin with, texts come with their politics. You're looking at a caste-based system in India. How many people had access to literacy? So if you're looking at Indian history only through text, you're only looking at the history of the elites and the Brahmins and the upper castes. They're the ones who wrote down their records. What about the lower castes? They don't have stories. Their stories are in folklore. Their stories are in song and legend and their community rituals and so on. That has not been given enough importance. There's something called the Mappila Ramayana in Kerala, which is a Muslim Ramayana. A fascinating thing where Shurpanakha propositions Ram and says, why don't you come carry on with me now? And Ram says, no, I've already got a wife, sorry, why don't you go to my brother? But then Shurpanakha says, but that's fine, the Sharia says you can take a second wife. So she actually quotes the Sharia in this version of the Ramayana. Ravan is treated as a sultan. But the funny thing is, this was sung by local bards in Malabar, and street singers and people who travelled. It was never codified. So most of it is now lost. What remains is what M.N. Karasheri, etc. found from the one of the last singers who existed in the 1960s and 70s. So only portions of it survive. Does that mean the Ramayana didn't exist? It existed. But because of this fixation that texts and written documents and Sanskrit documents are the only source of Indian history, they are one source of Indian history. When you look at history, you look at the documents, but you also look at architecture. You also look at art. You also look at what was happening on the ground with lower caste marginalized groups. And finally, you look at women and you find what is happening with them. Then you have something that resembles the big picture. Even then, it's not a complete truth. You can never categorically state that I have discovered the truth. This is how it was. Here's a stamp of authority. It doesn't work that way. You come close to something resembling the truth, and in that you understand things better. So historians also have to be open to that. And this positivist obsession with documents and records, it's a lopsided thing. It doesn't give you the full picture.
The historiography part of it. A couple of words that Manu used in his answer. I mean, the Oriental, the Occidental, hybrid. Students of Indian history sitting here in their culture studies would remember that, these were a couple of binaries that we dealt with. And hybridization, hybrid is increasingly recognizing that, everything has a layer to it, has a texture to it. And it is not always, black and white as we see. And hybridization is a concept which was worked on largely by Homi Bhabha and the rest of it. And I would encourage all of you students to read more on it. And into the binary question, let me also bring in one of sexuality. The latest book of Manu, Courtesan Mahatma, an Italian Brahmin, has a wonderful, fascinating chapter on Madurai Meenakshi, the goddess of the temple. Can you elaborate on that, Manu?
Yeah, so of course, we now think of her as an incarnation of Parvati, married to Shiva and so on. But the founding legend of Madurai Meenakshi is, clearly she was at some point a local goddess of local importance, and at some point she comes into contact with the Brahminical mainstream and she's absorbed into that, which happens all the time. It happened with tribal gods, etc., where you just turned them into an avatar of Parvati or an avatar of some other god. With Ayyappan, he was actually a hill god of tribals. When the Brahmin priests got there, they invented the story, Mohini, which is Vishnu, and Shiva have an affair, and they produce this son. It's Harihara Sutan, the son of two male gods. That's what Ayyappan is. Similarly, Madurai Meenakshi, her father was this king, and the king didn't have children. So, like Dasharatha in the Ramayana, there's this big homam that's done. And out of the flames, emerges this man emerges this child. He's praying for a son. What emerges is a female child, and not only female, she's got 3 breasts. She's got 3 nipples. Yeah. So the man says, gods, I asked you for a son and you've given me a freak. So the gods say, no, raise her like you would do your heir apparent, and she's going to achieve great things. And she grows up into this androgynous figure who's more interested in battle rather than what you would imagine as feminine pursuits or whatever. And she goes around conquering the world, etc. And finally she decides, and this may have been added later to the story, where she finally decides that she wants to conquer Kailash. And so she goes there, and then when she sees Shiva, her third breast disappears, and her arm, her weapons all fall down, and she becomes coy and shy and all of that. And they marry and come back. This is the legend, and it's about how Shiva comes and sort of takes charge there. But in reality, even today in the Madurai Meenakshi temple, she is the main goddess. She has more festivals, more rituals associated with her, and he is more a minor god. He's a god who seems to have come later to sort of marry her to a bigger tradition, to make this local goddess part of a bigger tradition. And look at the sculptures. The sculptures in that temple are absolutely fascinating. There are lions that are pillating themselves, under which there are all these nice mamis sitting and chanting their shlokas and all that, oblivious to what the lion above them is doing. There are these statues where Arjuna is becoming Arjuni, which is his female version. And the statue is fascinating because he's got the features of a Southeast Asian man, including the long, straight beard, the body of a woman, including the breasts, but again the nipples of a man, a very peculiar statue. But again, all of this is trying to communicate something. Indian temple rituals are just absolutely fascinating because a lot of it, if you apply logic to it, there would be no logic. But all these legends are trying to paper over some historical event or context. I met a photographer called Claire Ani who was telling me about a festival in Cool called Kundi, which basically means bum. Kundi, as we know in Malayalam. So, what is the bum festival? It's a day when tribals are allowed to be, on a particular day at a local temple, all the tribals in the area is essentially come out in drag and come here and basically abuse the deity in the main temple. It's a right that they have. It's probably an echo of some sort of old antagonism between the people who brought the new gods and the original residents of those hills. Some remnant of that. And that sort of thing happens with so many temples in so many places in this country. You know, the Sabrimala temple where women, recently there's been that thing about not allowing women, about allowing women. The irony is that the priests who control the Sabrimala temple and its rituals and take care of the celibate god, the same family is also connected to the Chenganur temple where there's a goddess who menstruates. And for the longest time, that menstrual cloth where a red spot apparently appears every now and then, there was a 35-year waiting list because devotees wanted it. And the goddess is taken out in a great procession for a ritual bath after her menstruation happens. So on the one hand, they control a menstruating goddess and her temple. On the other hand, they're also part of a temple where women are not allowed. These ironies exist in all over the place. Our effort to try and impose logic on it is in an Indian context unhistorical because these were not built for logic. These were built for various other reasons. One of the essays, I think the fourth essay is on the Srirangam and the Melkote temples in South India, where there's a Muslim goddess inside a Hindu temple. Now the legend says, and this is in the Koilurga, the Temple Chronicles, it talks about how the invading armies came, and it's fascinating how these temple custodians knew how to hide the idols. So in some temples, for example, they build a decoy wall inside the Sanctum Sanctorum, hide the actual idol behind the decoy wall and have a fake one in front, so the invaders would take that one and go. Anyway, in the Srirangam temple, they take the idol of the deity and go off to Delhi. The story goes that a certain lady follows and goes all the way to Delhi, and she's called Pin Tudarnavalli, she who followed. She goes all the way, she finds out where the idol is kept, she comes back to Srirangam and tells, look, I know where your idol is, you better come with me, I'll show you the way. So she takes all these 60 bhaktas to Delhi. There they dance and they sing for the Sultan of Delhi. And the Sultan, like characters in Hindu epics, says, I will grant you a boon. And they say, thank you very much, we'd like our idol back. Sultan says, fine, I've got a storeroom with many idols in it. As if that's how Sultan kept it. They used to smash the idol. It was never kept in a storeroom. He says, go and pick up your idol from the storeroom. So they go to the storeroom and they discover, oops, the idol is missing. What's happened is the Sultan's daughter has picked up the idol, she's taken it to her chambers and she's playing with it like a doll. She dresses it, she gives it breakfast, she puts it to sleep, washes it, all of that. And the funny thing is, in Hindu temple rituals, this is how you venerate gods. You wake them up in the morning, they have their meals, they have their processions, you put them to bed. So by doing this, she was essentially doing bhakti. And again, in a sign of the fact that our ancestors had more of a sense of humor than we did, the temple chronicles also add that during the day she played with the divine, she played with the deity like a doll. At night, he took human form to play games with her. You can imagine what, you can interpret that as you like. So the point is, she goes to sleep, the deity leaves with his original followers. When she wakes up, she's scandalized. She's like, where is my beloved? So she decides to give chase. They split into two groups. One group takes the deity to Tirupati to hide it. And there's a whole adventure about how it eventually comes back decades later and a blind washerman identifies the idol, etc. But when she gets to Srirangam, she finds that the idol's not there. So she collapses in the pangs of viraha and dies there. And the when the deity eventually comes back, he says, I have acknowledged Tuluka Nachar. Tuluka comes from Turuska or Turk, equal to Muslim. Nachar is princess. I have acknowledged this Turkish princess as my consort. And since then, she has been enshrined as a veiled wall painting in the temple in Sri Rangam. And every time the deity has his processions in the temple, when he's brought in front of her shrine, he's wrapped in a colorful lungi, which is the mark of the South Indian coastal Muslim. And his prasad is North Indian food like chapati, which South Indians didn't eat until very recent times. But in the temple, it was available as a prasad for the deity. In the Melkote temple, she exists as an actual veiled idol. And she's there as an idol rather than a wall painting. Now the thing is, this legend, was there a woman like this who came all the way from Delhi and fell in love with the divine? Was that idol talking? Unlikely. Is it likely that there was perhaps a woman who was instrumental in getting idols released from the custody of various Muslim invaders, etc.? Maybe possible. But the issue is not whether or not she exists. Yeah. The issue is what is the legend trying to achieve. Yeah. The legend is essentially placing into a Hindu worldview, into a Sanskritic worldview with its own metaphors. It's taking a Muslim lady and putting her, giving her a space in its own metaphors. Right. Just like when the Vijayanagara emperors, etc. come, all the Sanskrit texts. See, the Muslim invaders have come and they've finally settled down. So they've realized that we have to deal with this new arrival who was not part of our culture. They've got their own ideology. What do? There are old metaphors. The king of Vijayanagar was called the Narapati, the lord of men. The king of Orissa was considered the Gajapati, lord of elephants. There was a third metaphor called Ashwapati, lord of horses. That was conveniently given to the Delhi sultans, then to the Bahmani sultans of the Deccan, then to the Mughals. And there are the Rayabachakamu, for example, from the early 17th century, talks about how Vijayanagar is blessed by Tirupati, Jagannath, Puri Jagannath blesses the Gajapatis of Orissa, and Kashi Vishwanath blesses the Mughals. And the enemy is the Bahmani Sultan. So even in vilifying one set of Muslims and their kingdom is horrible, people are being killed on the streets and cut into 2 pieces, all of that is happening. But there the Mughals are good. Mughals are seen as, Ashwapatis, blessed by Kashi Vishwanath, etc. Because it wasn't, again, black or white. It was the fact that people found ways to fit people into their own metaphors and so on. Kings and their self-identity did come from religion, but it was not communal. As you came further down this thing, it was much more. There the syncretism becomes more important because the masses lived in a much more syncretic existence. Communal identities didn't exist because for a Dalit, the Brahmin is as alien as a Muslim. For a Brahmin, the Dalit is as alien as a Muslim. There's no great difference there. It's only in the 19th century, once the British come, this goes to your earlier question, they come in and they do something called a census. For the first time, the entire subcontinent is counted. And suddenly you have this notion that, so many people are Hindus, so many people are Muslims, majority, minority. That's when the politics starts, the number game starts there, because the majority says, we are the majority, we should have the higher share of jobs. Nationalism begins essentially, originally with a feud over jobs. How are government jobs going to be divided among the elites? That's where it all begins. And that's where this communalism starts, where numbers start to matter, and totalizing identities. Diversity starts disappearing in the sense that, there was a civilizational unity in India, in the sense that wherever you go, you find the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but it's not merely India, it exists in Thailand and Vietnam. We point at Panchavati and say this is where Nasik, and we say this is where Sita was abducted from. Go to Vietnam and Thailand, they'll point at a place saying this is where Sita was abducted from. Because every region where these epics went, they've created their own sacred geography and taken their own places and applied it to the story. But these epics existed everywhere. Brahmins existed everywhere, speaking one language, Sanskrit, and venerating the same text. And yet, in Banaras alone, there were over 100 varieties of Brahmins, all claiming to be superior than the others. In the Nambudri in Kerala will wear only white to her wedding pavilion. In Tamil Nadu, just across the hills, white is considered the color of widowhood. A Nambudri will wear his tuft of hair in front, the Tamil Brahmin will wear it at the back. Even within Brahmins, there's that much diversity on the basis of various historical contexts and circumstances. So there was no one identity that sort of somehow united this country. The one uniting principle was diversity, was difference, and the acceptance of that difference. Finding ways to sort of paper over that difference by creating legend, by creating myth. Our ancestors were superb at telling stories. All these stories are in some way, you find yourself in a tricky corner, write a story, move over that. It's a little bit like the Game of Thrones series. Every time the author finds himself in a tricky corner, he kills all his characters. They die in great and highly violent ways. But it's a similar device. You just change the story and you've got something new. That is the genius of our ancestors. Whereas we, with our cultural insecurity, treating custom and tradition like it's a rock you're supposed to put in a gilded cage and protect from something. That's never how custom works. You look at languages alone. It's only in the 19th century that Marathi was purged of its Persian elements, for example. The current Chief Minister of Maharashtra is Devendra Fadnavis. He's a Brahmin. Padnavas is a Persian word. The Peshwas of Pune, who ruled in Pune, ultra-orthodox Brahmin, Peshwa is a Persian word. The number of Persian influences in Marathi and in Indian languages. When the Maharani of Travancore in the 19th century wrote to the British governor in Madras, he and she both wrote in Persian, because Persian was seen as a language of diplomacy till 1835. That is how the world existed. And the parallels are just striking. Again, in Pune, I was doing some research on the Kotwal records, or the police records of the Peshwas. It's striking how human behavior doesn't change. In that, there was one record, of course, it's fascinating how much of it was about adultery, homosexuality, crimes, and so on. And there's this one case, for example, where a woman is trying to get rid of her husband. So she crushes a lot of glass into the atta and tries to feed her husband these treacherous chapatis. And she's tried for that. The Peshwas recognized marital rape as a crime, as opposed to our present legal system. We still don't recognize it. The Peshwas did. There's this case in the Peshwa records of a man who tries to rape his daughter-in-law. And his excuse in court is, no, I was on the way to the bathroom and I tripped. Now the funny thing is, about 2011 or 12, there was a Saudi diplomat in London who tried to assault a woman like this. And his defense in court was, I was on the way to the bathroom and I slipped. And to read that in the news and then to connect it to this 18th century record of a man with the same excuse, clearly men's behavior has not changed. So why are we assuming our ancestors were not like us? That is where the real gem lies. Once you suspend judgment, once you decide that history is not about choosing what is good and bad, history is about understanding it on its own terms, then the riches really stare you in the face. It's not black and white, it's a mosaic of colors. That is what makes it splendid. That, of course, requires a maturity and cultural security and confidence to stand up and say, which so-called custodians of culture seem not to have. Sad.
Okay. So, 3 books, Ivory Throne, Rebel Sultans, and The Italian Brahmin Bit. Which is the one closest to you and why?
I think the first book is always special because I spent 6 years writing it.
Okay.
It cost me the first half of my 20s, 19 to 25. My social life completely dissipated and sort of completely collapsed. So it was a very laborious process, but it was definitely something I was very interested in. On the one hand, it opened my eyes to a lot of feminist literature, especially on the matrilineal system, etc. I came across names like Devika, Sharda, Mani, Arunima. These are the people these are feminist scholars who brought such original work into understanding the matrilineal system. And for me, that was really an eye-opener. The other thing was a constant in all these books is I'm fascinated with power and how people negotiated power in the past. So Travancore, the Maharaja Martanda Varma who creates Travancore, very colorful character. First, of course, he goes with arms. He creates what is called a Hindu state of Travancore. The irony is the Hindu state of Travancore is created with arms from the East India Company. His troops are trained by a Dutch prisoner of war. His troops are all people, most of them are people borrowed from Tamil Nadu. They're Tamil mercenaries who've been brought in to conquer the Malayalis. That's how you create a Malayali Hindu state. That's the irony. Now, having conquered, he realizes that his people still don't respect him. They still see him as a foreigner, as a conqueror, as an outsider, not a legitimate king. So he says, okay, fine, I need legitimacy for my project. So he goes to the Padmanabha Swami temple, lays down a sword there. Of course, it's since been presented as a great spiritual act of surrendering all his conquests to God. It was a very clever thing because till yesterday you could criticize the king saying you're a conqueror, you're an outsider. Suddenly overnight the state belongs to God. So you can't criticize God. So suddenly criticizing the king equals criticizing God. And as a member of the royal family told me in confidence, so I won't name who it was, but a fairly senior member told me with a giggle how conveniently Padmanabha Swami in the temple is in yoga nidra with his eyes half shut, so the king can do whatever he wants in the name of the god. Then he realizes that he's first among equals till then. So he needs to upgrade caste. He needs to make royal blood sacred. So there's this fascinating ritual that was used by many Indian kings across the board. Shivaji did it to upgrade his lineage and acquire a sacred thread. The Nayakas in Tanjavur, Madurai, etc. did it to upgrade themselves. The Zamorin of Calicut did it. Again, Indian, Hiranyagarbha, where basically what they do is, of course there are different formats, but the Travancore format was you get a cow with all the right lakshanas, the spots in the right places, a tail like this and all of that. Then you construct a model of the cow in gold. Into this gold cow, which is humongous, goes the Raja. He goes in from the mouth of the cow, sits inside for a while. The Brahmins pelt it with, mantras and gomutra or whatever. And they chant mantras of birth. And then he emerges from under the tail of the cow. Suddenly he's descended from the sun and the moon and he's a twice born Kshatriya with the sacred thread. And he's no longer the Naya who went in. Now suddenly he needs Brahmins only to cook his food. Now suddenly only Brahmins can touch him. And the other thing Marthandavarman, once having elevated his blood like this and surrounded himself with Brahmins, the next thing Marthandavarman does is to ensure that the people are always in awe of his family. So the thing with power is a very fickle commodity. The hard power leaves and the whole thing comes collapsing very quickly. Which is why kings always needed not just hard power but also legitimacy. Shivaji, for example, the Mughals always treated him as a warlord, as a rebel, till he did his coronation. With great Sanskritic rituals, he does this coronation. Now he's a sanctified king. Now when he meets the Qutub Shah embraces him. He doesn't bow before the Qutub Shah because now he's an equal. So these rituals matter. So Marthandavarman invents this wonderful system around the royal family. They have a 12-volume palace manual that tells you everything from how you must lie down when you sleep, which side of the bed you should get up, everything is covered in it, what kind of food you should eat, etc. But even the vocabulary used for the royal family becomes highly artificial. So for instance, when you and I wake up in the morning, we say in Malayalam, "Pallu thekka," to brush your teeth. The royal family, they don't brush their teeth. It's called Tirumutta Vilakku, the cleaning of the royal pearls. That's how it's always done. When members of the royal family go for a bath, you don't say kuli, which is a bath. You say palli neerat, the royal frolic in water. That's what's happening. When they're eating, it's called amradeta, eating nectar. You're not eating ordinary food. What you eat is nectar. Whenever the Maharani of Travancore gets pregnant, the proclamation doesn't say she's pregnant. Queens are not mortals who get pregnant. It says Tiruvayar Vanu, the royal womb is occupied. Then of course when she delivers the baby, queens don't deliver babies. The royal womb is vacated. Tiruvayar Vildu. That's how it goes. The thing is, and a number of servants. For example, the current titular Maharani of Travancore lives on Richmond Road in a nice colonial bungalow there. She tells how even when she was a 7 or 8-year-old girl, every time there was 4 o'clock they'd go out, the children were supposed to go out for a walk. Now each child had about 7-8 maids attached to her. Upstairs servants, downstairs servants, they were all combined. Then household guards, 2 in front, 2 on either side and 2 behind you. And someone holding up a parasol. So for this one 8-year-old girl to go out for a walk, there were 16 people following her like that with their mouths covered in a half bow. With a respectable distance. The idea was, it was comical in a certain way now that we look at it in retrospect. But the idea was anybody looking at this 8-year-old girl should think that she is special. That this person is not like us. This person is completely superhuman. But the funny thing is, 1947 comes, independence comes, actual hard power disappears. 1957, the same palace where the Maharani of Travancore lived with 300 servants, her own servants form a palace union under communist influence and they erect a communist flag on the palace when she wakes up one morning. All it took was 10 years. For 200 years, there was this great drama around the royal family, etc., to sort of reinforce their power. But the moment power went and the communists came into power, that's where the earth tilted in that direction. Suddenly, you didn't matter. Overnight, all this ritual, all this protocol was completely devoid of meaning. That's how quickly power goes. Which is why Indian kings, when they give grants, you look at these ancient records, all the grants always say, this grant shall last as long as the sun and moon endure. The kings themselves know their power is not going to endure till the sun and moon are there. It's going to endure for 100 years maybe. But they have to project this superhuman image to keep shoring up that sense of permanence in their family, in their dynasty, etc. That's also the reason why our history is so full of violence. Because violence not in private. When someone was executed back in the day, it was never in private. Why is it that Indian kings had these great temple rituals, processions where they went out with elephants, etc., and their soldiers and gold and everything on full display? Because you had to daily reinforce to your people that you were in charge. For that, you had to make a public spectacle. Public spectacle was a way of negotiating your control over your people. Similarly, punishment. If someone has a rebellion against the state, the punishment was never kind. You look at the Arthashastra, it says, if someone has an affair with the queen, cook him in a jar. Imagine, that must have been a very pleasant experience. In Beluthambi Dalava in the early 19th century, someone stands up and tries to orchestrate a rebellion. The punishment is one leg tied to one elephant, the other leg tied to another elephant, and you're torn to pieces. Yes. And elephants move very slowly. In the 18th century, when the Nawabs in the English East India company are fighting in Bengal, one of the characters they get rid of, a claimant, they say you can't kill the serpent and keep its young. So all the Begums are gone, taken to the middle of a river, and they're forced to drown there. Their ship is capsized and all of them drown. 70 or 80 Begums die there in the river. But one major heir, they put him between 2 planks and just squeeze him. And basically he's turned into chutney inside, and that's how he was killed. The thing is, all of these public demonstrations of violence were also what it was about, telling people that if you stand up to us and question us, we are going to give you trouble. And there's an essay in the book on the Kama Sutra. Now, we always think in general imagination that the Kama Sutra is about bedroom gymnastics and so on. But it's not. That's merely one section of the Kama Sutra. The Kama Sutra is actually an Arthashastra for love. It tells you how, apparently, if you're interested in a certain female, the best person to get to her is her wet nurse's daughter, because apparently that's her best friend. It tells courtesans that feel free to milk your patrons of all their money, but once their money is over, stamp your foot and make angry expressions till they leave, because you don't want them after that. It tells courtesans, oh, never take the patronage of a man whose breath smells of crows. I don't know what that means, but clearly the Kama Sutra writer did. And so many prescriptions. Apparently, a cultured man is a man who waxes himself full body every 10 days. I'll say that to men today. Obviously, none of us are cultured. But that was what the Kama Sutra's notion of a cultured man was. It's got so many prescriptions on all of these things. And it's just amazing that there was this kind of thought where everything was some sort of political negotiation about power. Once you understand power, you understand that these patterns keep repeating themselves in history. Because one thing you can count on is human stupidity. No matter how wonderful something is, you can always count on human beings 50 years later to come and destroy it. Which is what we are doing now with our own institutions. After the Second World War, after great violence, after great chaos in the world, global institutions were created so that we could negotiate peacefully. Even today in Parliament, when the Battle of Plassey, where the Nawab of Bengal's general switches sides and goes off to the English side. It was a deal between them. In those days, it happened on the battlefield with the sword and with blood flowing. Today, it happens in Parliament, in assemblies, in Bangalore, and things like that. People move from one seat to the other. But the point is, democracy created a space for these shifts to happen without violence, but as little violence as possible. Now we are questioning all these institutions. The far right is, watering down trust in these institutions. We're saying, oh, these institutions are not legitimate. We need change because we. In some ways, they're a victim of their own success. We've had 70 years of relative peace. More people die of obesity today than starvation. That's the truth of the world. Diabetes is more of a killer than suicide. That's the kind of world, suicide is and diabetes rather than people being killed. Yeah, so that's the kind of world we're living in. But because of its own success, people are now restless. We've forgotten what there was earlier, the pains that it took to create this. So now we're anxious for change, as though change is always some sort of good thing. Destroying something without having a clue about what comes next is to create a vacuum. And the vacuum is always filled by horrible ideas and horrible creatures and people. That, again, tells you history is, again, the patterns keep repeating. And human beings, their hypocrisy and stupidity is constant. So, we've had democracy for 70 years. Whether we'll have it for the next 70 is the question. Because we ourselves will destroy it.
The pageantry of power that, you were elaborating on a little bit earlier. In terms of an 8-year-old having an entourage of, 16 maids or, house guards and things like that. A little bit of it has, come into the institutions that we still have. I mean, whether it be the bureaucracy or whether it be the trappings of power. And even if you would look into the architecture part of it, the fact that Raisina Hills is right up there, for the public spectacle of power, the whole idea of having a corner office and things of that sort. Having, as somebody who has worked in the parliament as well, in close quarters, how much of the spectacle has moved into the
very
democratic
much, because the thing is, people in power space can never appear too common. Right. Familiarity breeds contempt. Yeah. If people think that your great public leaders and politicians are like you and me, then there's no romance to it. You follow a leader because you find them inspiring. Inspiration is about communication. Yeah. It's not really something special that they do. Yeah. It's merely about how they communicate something. That is where people find the magic and they're happy to follow a shepherd. Yeah. But that means there's a certain amount of PR. But that PR is again not a new thing. Anybody in power needs that to varying degrees. The irony is one of the books, essays in this book, the last one, is an essay called What If Gandhiji Had Lived? Because Gandhi once expressed a desire. Speculative essays are usually a naughty thing for historians to do, but I've engaged anyway. So there are 3 speculative essays. This one is that Gandhi had said he wanted to live for 125 years, which meant he would have died around 1994. So one thing the essay tries to do is how would he have responded to various political events that followed. For instance, in the 1970s, Indira Gandhi has the emergency. And he would have said, oh, what if, he'd said, oh, I'm going to fast them to death because this is not right. Would Indira Gandhi have said, fine, go ahead, fast. Would he have become an international problem for Pakistan? Because he was threatening by the time of independence to go and permanently live in Jinnah's Pakistan. Would Jinnah have had a problem at his hands if Gandhiji had survived? How would he have reacted to Babri Masjid? So that's one thing the essay tries to do. But the other thing the essay also tries to do is look at how we have dealt with Gandhi. Because the fact that he died there at that time was, it allowed the Indian state, which is still very new, and which was already, the leaders of the Congress party were already disagreeing with him. He didn't want the big dams and the industries, he wanted people to live in villages, whereas the new generation of the Congress leaders, they didn't believe in that at all. They wanted industrialization. So there were already issues there. So if he had lived on, perhaps, would he have recognized the constitution? Would he have given it his blessings? Would he have become a problem in that sense? Because he died, he could be garlanded and put on a banknote and conveniently forgotten. And the pageantry there, when Gandhiji's ashes were being scattered across different parts of the country, there were special trains that took his ashes to places. And the irony is, this is a man who wanted to die like a nobody. He said, no, I don't want any pageantry, etc. His actual funeral procession had 5,000 soldiers, all the corpse out in full display. It was like a sovereign, an emperor had died. That was the kind of pageantry because the masses needed it. You could not allow Gandhi to die like that. He may have wanted whatever he wanted, but that's not how they're going to deal with it. And this happens with Kabir, with so many figures in history. They expect one thing in death, but their disciples need them because you're creating a new institution. That person's martyrdom or sacrifice or death will be used to legitimize what follows. So the trains that went out with Gandhi's ashes after the cremation to different parts of the country, not only did it have the flag of the Indian Union, it also had the flag of the Congress party, right next to the flag of the Indian Union. Because the Congress party had moved from a romantic freedom movement into a party of politics and power, which meant they also needed the legitimacy. They also realized they had to start winning elections, which meant you had to really communicate to the masses. So pageantry, no matter which party, which side you're looking at, when you're in power and when you desire power, you have to look somehow special, you have to create a certain aura around yourself. That's it. And the aura could be anything. There's a party that walks around with brooms, because that's their aura, that's their method of communication. But it's also something distinct. That carving out of that space, that is a constant again in history. And that happens all the time. In the army, in the bureaucracy, there's a certain protocol, there's a certain system. All of this is meant to communicate a sense of authority and power. Because if you don't communicate, it can slip away very quickly.
So, into the hypothetical questions that Manu has attempted in the book, one such question is about the British Raj and its entry into the Indian subcontinent. How do you see a world, or how do you see the Indian subcontinent had the British not come into? And one of the factors that you have stressed on is the unifying force of the language, and how all the nationalist leaders in itself used English as a language to communicate, or the fact that we, even the present generation now, we sit across and talk in English. Now, into this language, I want to ask, as a historian, how do you employ language? Because if you look at Manu's books, there's a lot of alliteration in the titles. There is Jahangir, the eccentric emperor, and the essays begin and end in a style which is, which historians usually shun. Is that a marked deviation from the usual history writing style, or?
No, it's because I've got a very clear idea in my head that, see, all these stories, these wonderful gems of Indian history, they're all there. The thing is, they've been languishing in a seminar circuit where scholars and at academic conferences we hear this. But where are you communicating it to the masses, especially at a time when history is daily perverted online, on Twitter and on WhatsApp for political purposes? Where is the real stuff? Where is the actual perspective and the actual stories that are there? So many of them. So my job really is, I will do my research in an academic way, but I will not write like an academic, because I'm not intending to write for a seminar circuit. I definitely want to reach out to as large a constituency as possible, because that's how you persuade people to change their opinions. That's how you remind them of the past and the true perspectives in which you can look at the past. On the British Raj question, another thing I try to do with the book is this, as I said earlier, there's no black and white, there's no simplistic answer. So we now live in the fashion of the times is nationalist equal to good, British equal to bad, like imperialism equal to bad. But it wasn't all that stark. So even already in 1935, the British created a certain constitution. Under that, by 1938, Congress had formed government in 8 provinces. They were already part of the British system, and they formed governments in 8 provinces, and they were ruling a decade before independence. Does that mean that they're bad suddenly because they collaborated with the state? There's an essay on the Maharaja of Jaipur, this man who was a great photographer. In 1857, at the time of the rebellion, his troops, the people in Jaipur, wanted to join the rebels. He held them back and he stayed with the British. So he's a collaborator with the British. Does that make him bad? But what about the fact that he brought hospitals, he brought roads, he brought development, girls' schools and things like that to Jaipur? That also has value. On the other side, the imperialist side, Arthur Cotton was a man in the 19th century, an evangelist, here to civilize India, etc. But he's the one who built all the canals and irrigated that entire Godavari basin area, where to this day, his birthday is treated as a state holiday. Farmers come and garland his statue and do aartis to it because they still worship this Englishman who gave them water for their fields. Does that make him bad because he's British? Or does this contribution matter? Most importantly, even Queen Victoria, when she assumes the title of Empress of India, everyone says, oh, imperial woman, she's assuming Empress, la la la, bad. But in reality, if you look at the backroom negotiations, on the one hand, she's just this, her motivation to become Empress of India firstly was personal, in that Her daughter was married to the German crown prince, and she knew her daughter would one day become empress. And this lady couldn't stand the notion that her daughter would outrank her. So if her daughter was going to be an empress, she had to be an empress. That was the original motivation. The other thing is, at home she was a constitutional monarch. She had no power. The one place where the British government gave her some power was in India-related matters. And her proclamation of 1858 became so popular in India that Indians started using it for anything left, right and centre. Someone has a property dispute with his cousin, they'll send her a petition saying, your proclamation promised that you won't interfere in our things, your courts are doing this. When income tax was introduced in India in the 1860s, people sent a petition saying, no, income tax is not Indian, we should be ruled by our own rules, etc., etc. And this old lady in Buckingham Palace lapped this up with such enthusiasm because it finally gave her something to do. She's this quirky little grandmother who finally has a purpose in her life, thanks to all the posts she's getting from India. And she's handling each petition with such enthusiasm that finally the British government starts censoring her mail. They don't allow it to reach her. Her own office turns it back and sends it back to the Viceroy to handle. Because otherwise this lady is going to get even more excited about the work she's getting. So even in that story, and her assumption of the title of Empress of India, it's not that the British decided one fine morning that the Mughals have gone, we're going to become the new empress. It passed through Parliament in Britain with a very narrow majority. Because the British Parliament was extremely uncomfortable with imperial claims in a democracy. So the final compromise was she would be called Empress of India, but Queen back home. She was never called Empress back home. So they said, okay, you be an Empress in India, but you will never be an Empress at home. So even in that, there's so much compromise and consensus and back and forth. That's how that one title was designed. Everything in the colonial period also went through a similar process. People say, the missionaries came and they caused a great issue for the Hindu religion, etc., and converted people, etc. But it was also in missionary schools for the first time that lower caste people could get an education. They were not allowed in the proper schools of the Brahmins and the upper caste. That's where Pillai, the grandson of a Mali, a gardener, that's where he got his education. That's why he read in English The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine and dedicated his book Ghulamgiri to the people of the United States. Because access to a missionary school opened his eyes and connected him to a world of English literature and thought. And that he used for the liberation of the lower caste groups within India. So there the missionaries had a contribution. Why is it that Ambedkar is always depicted wearing suits? Because in upper caste, Gandhiji could discard his western clothes and wear the loincloth with great, as though he's renouncing and disclaiming the western influence. For Ambedkar, whose ancestors were not allowed to wear anything but a loincloth, wearing the suit was a mark of liberation. When a Mayavati in a statue holds a designer bag in her hand, people laugh at it, saying, oh, she's had statues with herself holding a designer bag. But the designer bag is telling Dalit women and Dalit men, I am a Dalit woman and these are statues of me, standing like this. I've got power, I've got money, I've got all of this. It's something to aspire for. Lord Macaulay is hated by the ultra-right wing, or even the right wing in general in India. But Dalits in different parts of the country still celebrate his birthday. Because the English language for them was a source of liberation. From an earlier system where Sanskrit and Indian languages dominated, English finally gave them avenues where they could start rising. So there is no black and white. Even in the freedom struggle, even in the experience of colonialism, it is much more complex. And for grand narratives, we may black and whiteize it, but that is not the full picture. I think we have to be open to understanding the full picture.
So another question that you've asked and not attempted to answer in the book is about Tipu Sultan. And I would want to hear your thoughts on, what if he had lived longer? Would India have looked different? South India have looked different? Karnataka in particular, would it have?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? If the British hadn't come, the speculative essay on what if there was no Raj. To begin with, our political contours, the boundaries would not have looked like this. Because what would have happened is the Sikh Empire perhaps would have continued in Punjab. North India would have been dominated by the Marathas, but with the Mughal emperor as the puppet ruler, as a constitutional head of some sort. Bengal would have had its own thing, where the Marathas, by the way, were not popular. And the south, in some sense, would have been a completely different zone. William Dalrymple has a new book called The Anarchy, which I recently read. And it's a very interesting book because it tells you, although it's focused on Hindustan, which is the north, you see that there people are still stuck with their technology, still slightly backward. They can't quite compete with the company. Where the company found its real match was in the peninsula. Because access to the sea meant that the same technology they were importing, Tipu Sultan was able to import via the French. Tipu's rockets, I mean, there's this wonderful, if you go to Srirangapatna, there's Tipu's summer palace there in Srirangapatna. It's an ugly structure from outside, and now they made it uglier with all sorts of mats and things hanging there. But there are these stunning frescoes and murals, etc. That entire surface of the building, any external surface is full of designs and patterns. One of India's biggest murals is there, where it shows the Battle of Pulalur. The Battle of Pulalur is where Tipu's troops basically defeat the company. And this is propaganda art. In 1784, Tipu commissions this painting where Tipu is nicely in the middle of this battle scene. He's on a horse smelling a rose because he's so relaxed because he's winning. And the English colonel is shown surrounded by his last English troops in a palanquin, which is suggesting he's slightly effeminate. He's not capable of, fighting on a horse or whatever. And he's chewing his fingers. It's propaganda art. Tipu's trying to show that, look, I'm the victor and these people are the losers. And Tipu and Hyder came the closest to giving the British a real fight. And the French cooperation also was tricky for the British. A lot of their conquest in India happened because of paranoia about the French. The Battle of Plassey, where does it begin? Because the British start fortifying Calcutta against the express orders of the Nawab. Why do they fortify Calcutta? Because they spot French ships which are actually on their way elsewhere. They assume the French are coming to attack, so they start repairing their walls. The East India Company's directors in London say, get permission from the Nawab before you do it. The man on the ground ignores it. That is what leads to the Battle of Plassey. That is how an entire province falls into the hands of a corporation for the first time in history after the battle. So the human judgment at tricky moments matters so much. That one man's decision on the ground, if he had taken the Nawab's permission, none of this may have happened. But he didn't. So this what-if question is very tantalizing. And Dalrymple in his book talks about how in 1780, the South came very close to an alliance, a triple alliance between Mysore, the Nizam of Hyderabad, and the Marathas. And if they had actually combined, they had that brief window in 1780 to combine against the British. There was prevarication, there was hesitation there, and in that gap, Warren Hastings from Bengal set loose his diplomats and his envoys, and he managed to break away any such alliance from happening. But in that time, if they hadn't waited, if they hadn't done this, they might have changed the course of history. So it's fascinating how much depends, and Tipu's rockets are what eventually led to rocket studies in England, etc. His rockets really shocked the British, because one would land. An Indian, this happened with Vijayanagar and the Sultans as well. Vijayanagar was backward in terms of importing technology from other parts of the world. Whereas the Sultans, they were very good at importing technology from the Islamic world. So their fortifications were better, and their artillery was better. So at one point during the Battle of Talikota, instead of cannonballs, they filled the guns with coins. And the result is when the blast of gunpowder happens, you've got like thousands of coins flying through the air, essentially like bullets. So they say that 5,000 people on the Vijayanagar side collapsed in one shot because these coins came out of nowhere, piping hot, and really hit them in the face or wherever, and they all collapsed. It was coins, it was just genius thinking, putting coins into it instead of cannon. And they got ahead, whereas the kings of Vijayanagar didn't really bother very much with artillery. So choices of technology, choices of when you act and how you act. Battle of Plassey, another interesting thing is, it started raining mid-battle. Otherwise, Clive would have lost. Mid-battle it starts raining. Clive has the judgment, his troops have the judgment to cover their gunpowder. Our Indian troops is sitting there nicely, gunpowder is getting wet, wonderful things, all the guns go quiet. That's where Clive gains the advantage. He's got 1/10 of the troops that we had, or the Indian side had, but he had the guns, and their guns went silent. And they made the mistake of assuming that his gunpowder was also wet. So they nicely charged at him, only to be shot down. So, so much is, that what if is a very tantalizing thing, because human judgment has so much to do with history. We often think that decisions are taken in boardrooms where everyone thinks of the best logic and the best decision to be taken. No, their personal egos, their vendettas, their personal rivalries, all kinds of things are flicked. And that's how finally decisions are taken. Frankly, at the highest levels, everything is a matter of chance. And if you're lucky, you end up with good consequences.
Yeah, true. So I'm going to marshal you from the ancient Indian history, the medieval and colonial times, to the present times, when the hashtag Sari Twitter was trending, and Manu posted this picture of Kalyani Pillai on Twitter. And in fact, I must say that one of the tweets that you have pinned to your profile is how history should be viewed from the point of view of courtesans and women, and kudos to that. In fact, for that tweet, all of us put our glasses on, and we all replied as well to that tweet saying that, is this the first woman to wear a sari in southern India, or is this the first woman who was photographed wearing a sari? So my question, because largely the crowd is fashion students and design students, what are the interesting nuggets that you have come across? Who is that one fashionista in history that you would give an arm and a leg
This particular lady I put up the photo of, the chances of her being the first woman to wear a sari in Kerala are very high. A, because the sari wasn't worn till the 20th century. Majority women wore the munda and no upper cloth. That was that one, it wasn't even 6 yards, it's shorter than that. That's munda. That's what they regularly wore. The Cochin royal family, you look at their family portraits, if you look online, you won't find very many pictures of Kochis, Ranis and princesses. Because even into the mid-1940s, etc., they were not covering themselves. You have these grand family photos, mothers, brothers, sons, everybody sitting uniformly topless. Because they didn't cover themselves even into the 20th century. Travancore, on the other hand, the Ranis were a little posh. And the court in Travancore tried a little bit to sort of engage and figure out what was happening in other parts of the world, other parts of the country. Kalyani Pillai was the wife of the Maharaja called Iodine, who ruled from 1860 to 1880. Fascinating woman, originally the daughter of a minister of Cochin. One day this great star of Kathakali in the Travancore court called Ishwara Pillai, Vichayapakar, he comes to Kochi somewhere. She elopes with him and comes down to Trivandrum. Is briefly his wife. Somewhere in the middle she meets the Maharaja, decides that, okay, forget this man, I'm going to go off with the Maharaja. So she becomes consort to the Maharaja, his official wife. She's adopted, the Maharaja is only allowed to marry from a few families. So conveniently she's adopted into one of these families and she becomes the consort. And in this position, she starts traveling to other places. So remember, sari is not being worn by most Malayali women then. There is no concept of this kind of draping of the sari and all that. The other clue is also her jewelry. She's wearing Tamil, she's wearing that. And the photograph was taken in Madras. Yeah. So the chances are, on the course of her trip, she went to Banaras with her husband, and on the way down they came to Madras. That's where she probably picked up this garb and got herself photographed in a sari, wearing Tamil temple jewelry and Tamil women's ornaments and so on. And then eventually went back to Kerala and went back to wearing the munda. So the chances of her wearing this sari is very interesting. The next few people who wear the sari are the consorts of the Maharajas. The next Maharaja's name is one after the next. His name is Moolam Dirmal. Moolam Dirmal first has a wife, which is this Kalyani Pillai's adopted daughter. She dies in childbirth. 18 years later, he falls in love with the wife of a palace employee. So very conveniently, palace employee says, Master, you take my wife, give me a title in return. So the servant gets the title, the Maharaja gets the wife. The wife is again adopted into an aristocratic family, becomes consort. And there is this striking photograph of her with her daughter, and they're wearing some sort of very heavy gold thread sari. And you can see it's very awkward on them. It's this heavy thing they're not used to wearing with their puffed sleeves and, the old Kerala hairstyle. Yeah. So the hairstyle is still the old one where they've got a bun up here in the front. Yeah. But the clothes are sari and the other saris and the ornaments are all the Tamil or new ornaments they're wearing. It's a complete hodgepodge. Yeah. But it's also a moment in history where notions of how women should dress are changing. Blouses are starting to come in the elite areas. And slowly, women are told that if you're civilized women of good families, you must start wearing blouses. That starts coming in. Silk is started to be, they start using silk more and more prominently. So Rukmini Verma, who lives, as I mentioned earlier, on Richmond Road, she still has her grandmother's old gold and silver thread tissue shawls. Okay. Because even though she wore a munda, that was like all other Malayalis, she wore the cotton munda. But because she was the queen, she always wore these gold or silver or silk shawls over it. That was her sense of fashion. And different people have different ways of carrying it. In Kochi, in Travancore, the style, because of British exposure, you had the munda around the waist. They used to tie another one around the torso. Yeah. It was called the Tete-a-tete. In Kochi, the system is different. So you look at portraits of Cochin queens, they simply take another cloth and put it like this under their, sort of fold it and put it under their armpits like this. Okay. And they play tennis like that, they do all their daily chores like that with this thing under their armpits like that. And it's fascinating. And there's a 90-year-old ex-cricketer in Kerala called Ravi Achal. He says his father was a prince of the Cochin royal family. He tells me how his mother, it never fell, and that was the thing. Now, and it was so orthodox that even when they started wearing saris, etc., you could do all that outside. When you came back to the palace, you had to get out of the car, you had to go take a dip in the pond, and then wear the palace garb, which is this armpit thing, and then enter the palace. Right. And the stories are so curious. There's so much orthodox, there's beliefs in caste pollution, that doormats, outside every palace there's a doormat. And the palace people thought, no, these doormats must be defiled by so many random people in their feet. So we will jump over it when we go in. The lower caste people would feel, Ayo, the kings will take offense, so we will also jump over it. So outside most palaces, there were doormats touched by nobody, because everybody was constantly jumping over the doormat to preserve the sanctity of the caste order. That was the kind of world that existed. And so fashion in Kerala, it varies depending on the area. You have armpit fashion in one place, you have the Tete-a-tete in another place with blouses that come in. The hairstyle in the front turns into a bun at the back because it starts looking increasingly outlandish. So if you look at the cover of the first book, you can see the original hairstyle, which is this strange bun you'll never see in Kerala anymore, where women have rolled it up in front. But these very women, by the junior Rani on one side, she's the first royal family member, not a consort, who starts wearing a sari, starts going out, travels abroad and so on. So you'd see these shifts slowly coming in. but nothing too flamboyant or colorful.
Yeah, but when you say that Travancore was one place which experimented with fashion and which had, it's also because it had its boundaries shared with Tamil Nadu, and there were a lot of movement of people coming in. And so also, from Maharashtra as well, because the earlier divans were from, and a lot of vestiges in terms of food, in terms of jewelry, in terms of saris. You would see that, in Kerala, we owe it to them. And into this conversation at this juncture, I want to introduce Raja Ravi Verma. How would you take on that? Because Ravi Verma, again, he made his fame outside Kerala, and then, he democratized art to a great extent. Can you, have, or, do you remember any interesting anecdotes about...
He's a very interesting figure. To begin with, he does his portrait of his daughter. It's a rather famous painting where she's standing with a baby in one arm and she's pointing with the other arm. With the other hand. Yeah, it's called There Comes Papa. Right. Now the ironic thing is, in the matrilineal system, the father was nobody. Yeah. Husbands and fathers had no place really. Yeah. So Ravi Verma's making the father or the husband the main figure in this thing is also a hint that social mores are changing. Now suddenly the husband, the father is slowly becoming an important figure. Since we are speaking of the Kujjur royal family, the husbands, they were all Brahmins. They were paid salaries for their duties. So if you came from a normal Brahmin family, you were paid 6 rupees a month. If you were from an exalted Brahmin family, you were paid 8 rupees a month. Till finally one day, one of these Brahmin husbands complained to the Maharaja that you can't have 2 rates of pay for men performing the same job. So that was the universe. But Ravi Verma's art, in that moment, encapsulates a changing mentality where the husband starts taking over. The other thing is, all his women, whether it's his mythological women or Kerala beauties or whatever, they're all these fair-skinned women. Whereas the actual epics talk about Draupadi, Sita, Panchali, they're all dark-skinned people. They're not considered. Krishna, he turns Krishna into blue color, but in reality Krishna is actually dark. Krishna means dark. That you can see a sense, you can sense that aesthetic changing in terms of what is pure beauty and what is not. So for him, dark skin is only Rakshasis, beggars, servant, and his mother-in-law. Because he's done a portrait of his mother-in-law. And to me, that is the most striking Ravi Verma portrait I have ever seen. It's in a private collection in Bangalore. And it's a stunning portrait where, in this galaxy of fair-skinned, doe-eyed women he's painted, here is a woman with a bulbous nose, dark skin, so dark that he had to make the background marble white to create a contrast. She's got bloodshot eyes and she's glaring out of the painting at you. It's a striking painting. And this was the only piece where he actually reflected reality as it was in some respects. In other places, he was sort of projecting on canvas a new aesthetic that was coming along. And that new aesthetic became extremely influential. It was his lithographs that went around houses. The sari became popular because of his lithographs. It was the Bengali women who started wearing it. But once he started draping his Saraswatis and Lakshmis in that format, suddenly it became like an in thing. Suddenly the idea that goddesses must have been fair came because only his Rakshasis were dark. So, only the Rakshasis are dark, goddesses are fair. The notion of fairness gets a little bit of an upgrade thanks to his work. So there are plenty of influences. Also, nationalism. This is a time where he's creating a visual imagery for an entire country. Slowly, as the country is unifying, becoming part of one united force, he's the one who supplies the visual imagery for it. And he does this other interesting group portrait of musicians from across India, where it's all women in their various costumes from different parts of the country, sitting with various musical instruments. To even think of such a thing, it wasn't merely a random experiment. He was trying to project some sort of, united identity over there. So he's a very interesting man in that sense. Again, the irony is he did so much for a patriarchal reading of Malayali womanhood and so on. He himself was a product of a matrilineal system, not so much of the patriarchal system. But such is. So, there's an interesting anecdote. In Mysore, the Maharaja, since we are in Bangalore, the Maharaja of Mysore gave him 2 long pieces of silk, peculiar to Mysore, with gold thread embroidery and all of that, as a mark of honor. He could have worn it as a shawl or whatever. Instead, what he did is, he took one piece and gave it to his older granddaughter, who became the future Maharani Setulakshmi Bai of Travancore, and the other one to the younger granddaughter. And this is what they wore in Tamil style for their wedding. The skirts and the blouses, etc. were made out of what the Maharaja of Mysore gave him as a gift.
So, okay, let's talk about Manu the person now. A very, very active social media.
That's a very ominous topic.
Very, very active social media player. In fact, I always wonder.
Hardly, only on Instagram.
I wonder at your patience. Every tweet goes replied. Every question that is asked is very, very patiently replied to. How do you manage? And you're also a columnist. I mean, you have your regular columns with Mint, and you write for the Open, Hindustan Times. It's appeared in Hindu. How difficult is it to deal with social media anxiety and keeping the tab on the followers and the stories, the highlights, and then meeting the deadlines? That's something that students would really want to know.
No, because I spent 6 years working on my first book, which sort of squeezed out every bit of energy out of me. I've learned time management fairly well, so I know how to manage my time. The social media, Twitter, I don't use very much because it's largely become a toxic space. And I've learned to ignore loonies because that's what they want. They want attention because that gives them a greater sort of prominence or amplifies their message. So if you ignore them, that's what they hate. So it's better to ignore them. So I reply to people who are polite, even people who disagree. So long as you're not abusing and you're being polite, I'm happy to engage. But if people are abusive, then bye-bye, blocked. That's the formula. But what I really enjoy is Instagram, because on Instagram, it all began because in my last research cycle in London, 10 hours, 12 hours a day in the library, as I said, my companions are people several decades older than me on either side. Nobody talks in a library. Yeah. There are days when the only sentence you've uttered is to the canteen lady saying, how much is that sandwich for? Otherwise, you don't talk. That's the kind of isolation you feel in an archive or a library. And to do that month after month after month, well actually no, I'm exaggerating. Every 3 weeks I'd go for a holiday in Europe and then I'd come back. But so I'd have breaks every now and then. But the point is consistently doing this for a year, it does take a toll. Yes. There Instagram came to my rescue because every time I came across an interesting miniature painting, I'd put some fancy funny caption on it and put it on my stories or whatever. And that's just become a thing. So now I just use Instagram for also a little bit of self-deprecation because it helps you stay a little grounded also. And it's fun just to laugh at yourself. Never take yourself too seriously either. Because, for all these books that I've done, in 25 years, new material may come forward. Yeah. New perspectives may come forward. Yeah. We today look at the Victorian historians and we say, your gender lens and your lens of morality clouded your understanding of history. Yeah. Today, we've accepted the feminist perspective. In their time, if you tried to explain to them the feminist perspective, they would not have understood at all. They'd have had no idea. Yeah. But today, you can't avoid the feminist perspective. You have to have the feminist perspective on board. Tomorrow, there may be an LGBT perspective, which we are oblivious to now. Yeah. But that may come in with a completely fresh perspective. So my books may be outdated very soon. In about 10 years, there may be a better writer with a new perspective, with new evidence and all of that. So having that basic humility to know that what you've written is not gospel truth. It's possible it will be revised in the future. It's possible that new things will come up and new angles will come that we've all missed, an entire generation has missed. Understanding that keeps you also fairly grounded. You don't take yourself too seriously. And then if you're doing comical things on Instagram all day long, it's fun. Usually what I do is between work, every 2 hours I'll put up something on Instagram because that's my only diversion. When you're sitting in front of a laptop surrounded by books and documents all day long, this is my only escape. So that's how the social media started. And Instagram is still not a toxic space. It's fairly, you can engage with people on a healthy sort of basis. Yeah. People are there and they're genuinely curious. And the thing is, again, because when someone sends you a message, it's not visible publicly. So nobody grandstands and starts showing off. Yeah. You can have a serious, sober discussion without getting carried away. Unlike on Twitter, where everybody gets completely carried away. I've been trolled even for my name. Now, it's a very complicated situation where Malayalis will say, how can you have a caste surname? Aren't you propagating the caste system? You write about caste and all that, but you've got this caste surname. So I was like, if I get rid of the Pillai, what am I left with? Manu, of the Manu Smriti, the man who invented caste. Great. Then in the north they'll say, who cares about Pillai? How can you have a name called Manu? Recently, a few months ago, a lady on Twitter told me saying, don't you understand the pain you cause Dalits when you look at them in their face and introduce yourself as Manu? I said, I understand. I understand that it's not a name that carries a great heritage behind it. But if I drop Manu, then what am I? Pillai? There's no end to it. I understand the point. I understand that we have to acknowledge our caste privilege. We have to acknowledge where we come from and all of that. But I'm not changing my name. That is, no matter who says, my late father gave me this name, I'm going to keep this name for the rest of my life. So people who want to troll will find any reason to troll really. Why you a Pillai, why you a Manu, the reasons are plenty. It's your choice, do you want to wrestle with the pig or not? If you want to wrestle, well, you're the one who will have the mark on your shirt. Yeah. So, it's a choice you make. Yeah. So I ignore the trolls and I try and engage with the sensible people.
Right. Okay. So, how involved are you with the packaging of the book? I say this because, if you would just look at the cover of Rebel Sultans, it's a very, very interesting jacket that you have here with an African on the elephant. I hope you can see it. And then there is the emperor on the elephant as well. So, how do you pick the jacket covers? And in the courtesan Mahatma and Italian Brahmin. It has been beautifully illustrated by Priya Kudia. So was that?
Who I tried very hard to persuade to come today.
Okay.
She seems a little reserved about sitting on stage and talking.
Okay. So, how involved are you with this?
Quite.
Quite.
So, for example, since you pointed the Rebel Sultan's cover, we looked at a lot of paintings from the Deccan from that period. Most of them I didn't like because, see, cover images have to be striking.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it at one glance and feel interested in the book, because a person enters a bookstore, there's only so many seconds you've got to capture their attention. So for me, I'm involved in all these things because I want that attention. So this particular cover we like because it's got this nice royal sort of blue thing going on, the color. But the more interesting thing is, it's not too dense. There aren't too many characters. It isn't occupied. Every corner isn't filled with detail. So it doesn't overwhelm a person looking at it either. But more importantly, it also reflects the Deccan perfectly. The Deccan is in India. The elephant is a quintessential Indian animal. It represents India in all sorts of motifs and arts across time. So this is India. Who's riding it? The Adil Shah of Bijapur. Yeah. And behind him is the African. The Deccan was a huge magnet for immigration. Not only Persians and people from other parts of the world, but also from Africa. Thousands and thousands of Africans came to the Deccan. They all married local women. Their blood is passed down to us. We don't acknowledge it, but it's there. Yeah. Long before Shivaji, when Shivaji's grandfather was alive, Shivaji's grandfather was the right-hand man of a man called Malik Ambar, who was an African, born as a slave in Ethiopia, shipped off and captured at some point, shipped off to Baghdad. From Baghdad, he comes off to Goa, where he's purchased by the Peshwa over there, of the Sultanate of Ahmednagar. The Peshwa himself, the minister, is a black man, because he had come as a slave earlier, risen up the ranks, and gone on to become minister to the king. Malik Ambar goes on to have a mercenary army, and once the Mughals enter and Chand Bibi is killed, etc., Malik Ambar becomes a defender of the Deccan. So much so that Emperor Jahangir was so upset that he could never defeat Malik Ambar properly, that he commissioned a painting in which Jahangir is shown shooting an arrow at Malik Ambar's severed head. It was something that never happened. Malik Ambar died a very old man in a fort, very secure in his power. But Emperor Jahangir was fantasizing in art what he could never achieve in real life, because he was such a powerful figure. Malik Ambar in Shivaji's Shiva Bharata, which Shivaji commissioned in the 1670s, is called as brave as the sun. You know, when he's fighting one of the battles, I think he's compared to the god Kartikeya and so on. So there's a lot of respect for Malik Ambar at that time. He was a great ally of the Marathas. Under him, the Marathas really came into their own. And he was a great proponent of guerrilla warfare, which was then used by the Marathas for decades and perfected by Shivaji. So the African there represents the Deccan as a space where, again, the notion of insider outsider, who belongs in India, who doesn't. Yeah. The thing is, Persians came, Africans came, the Chinese came, people from all over the place came to the Deccan. The history of the peninsula is about people moving. And that is frankly the history of the world. Yeah. So the African on that elephant represents that aspect of the Deccan where the African community shaped so much. The Adil Shah represents the other element, which is not only Islamic but also Hindu. Because the Adil Shahs are descended from a man called Yusuf Adil Shah, Adil Khan, who came from Persia. When Indian bonded labor was shipped off to the Caribbean, etc., there was something called ship Brahmins, which is you enter the ship as one caste. By the time you land in the Trinidad and the Caribbean islands, you've upgraded yourself on the ship into a Brahmin. So suddenly you've become elevated in caste. Yusuf does something similar. On the ship from Persia, he's probably a very obscure origin. There's this concocted genealogy that he's a long-lost son of the Ottoman emperor. His life was in danger, so as a baby he was given away in secret to somebody, and that's how he ended up in India. So this Persian man marries a Maratha woman. Now she's not a passive trophy of war who has no say in politics. 2 generations later, when her legitimate grandson doesn't prove to be up to the mark, she has no qualms blinding him, putting him to the side, and taking an illegitimate grandson and making him the Sultan. So right from day one, the Adil Shahi dynasty, which by name you'll assume is just an Islamic dynasty, was a Maratha Shia Muslim alliance. And that is nicely represented here. So this image for me represents not only the Indian elephant, but also the mixed influences that have shaped the history of the Deccan in that period. And for that, and with the fact that there were very few elements in the painting, I thought this was a cover we had to pay a huge license fee for, but it was worth it.
So, and the illustrations to have Priya on board, I mean, how is that decision taken? I mean, was it your choice or was the publisher's?
Illustration was originally my publisher's choice. They are the ones who said, let's illustrate it. Initially I was like, yeah, whatever, illustration, yes or no, I have no opinion on it. Then of course Priya started sending her work and I was like, wow, this is genuinely amazing. In fact, 3 of the original pieces that she's actually done, these are all printed copies. Right? The original artwork my sister's purchased now. So it's being framed and put up on a wall in Bombay. So the artwork really brought it to life. Like not only did she do her own research to understand these characters, etc. There's only one place where we had a little comical episode which she, in one of these events, she actually mentioned it. where there's the essay on Ramanujan. Now when she looked up online, she found a picture of the scholar A.K. Ramanujan rather than the mathematician. And so she drew an illustration based on his wife. And I was like, and him. And I was like, no, this isn't the Ramanujan I'm talking about. I'm talking about the other Ramanujan. So then we had to correct that one. But otherwise, splendid work. Absolutely amazing work. And it really did add a lot of character to the book. So there are these charcoal pieces where when this book first came to me, I'd rub my finger on it thinking the pencil dust would stick to my finger. It was so good. So I think it really has enriched the book in many ways.
Okay. And what is the fourth book on? There's a lot of speculation and
curiosity. No, I'm a very superstitious person. I don't talk about things not done yet. Okay. So let me finish the book, then we'll talk about 2021.
Does that have anything to do with your PhD thesis?
No, nothing.
No, nothing at all.
Each thesis is always a bland thing. That's a separate thing altogether, which will never be published and never be shown to the world. Okay. But this is a completely different project.
And it's also, we as a nation we are very, very captivated with the idea of converting all books into movies. So we have Manikarnika, we have Bajirao.
Oh, that's an awful movie, by the way.
We have Jodha.
Hideous movie. I mean, in this book there's an actual essay on Lakshmi Bai.
Which is why
for
I
a full
talked about
year
that.
She didn't join the rebellion. She was negotiating with the British. She was only finally, and that negotiation, she had a lawyer-like quality. She understood every principle. She actually fought them on principle. And she was in the right. They didn't acknowledge it. That's when she went and picked up the sword. Just because she died like a hero on the battlefield, we can nicely enshrine her and put her to the side. But she's actually a clever woman. Her mind was really sharp. It wasn't merely the battlefield heroines. She was a very intelligent woman in her head. So the Manikarnika, everything she does is noble all day long. No, she's a woman of more personality than this monochromatic nonsense on screen.
Okay. So, have you been approached for a movie, right?
So my first book they've optioned for a web series. If it happens, we'll see. The thing is, I don't believe in these things that they actually happened. So if it happens, it happens. It's been optioned, they're exploring it, they're doing the initial groundwork for it. But let it come to life. I'm not involved because I know what I'm good at, which is writing books. Everyone says, oh, you should do the script and all, but I don't like putting my finger in every pie. You develop one thing well and you keep sticking to that as long as possible. And then, build up a little bit of a space there. Rather than grab every option that comes in front of you like some hungry child.
Okay. So that brings to an end my session with Manu S Pillai. Can we hear it loud and clear from Manu for having this conversation?
I must thank all of you for being here, because when we were talking earlier and planning this event, I told her 3:30 in the afternoon who's going to come. You'll have empty chairs and so on. I'm really impressed that so many people have showed up to listen to an afternoon. After lunch is very difficult to get people to pay attention. But clearly, some success has been achieved here.
Surely. And I would now throw it open to the audience for any questions and that you would want to ask Manu.
Hi Manu, I follow you on Instagram. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I mean, not a moment was going. It's amazing. I want to know, you focused on Kochi and Trivandrum. I want to know, because I come from North Kerala, I don't know if you have explored the history of North Kerala.
Not very much. The dynamics are slightly different there. Again, this homogeneity didn't exist even in a sliver of the coast like Kerala. So there was a rule back in the day that North Malabar women couldn't marry men from South Malabar. So, and it was so recent that when Krishna Menon's father married his mother in the 20th century, in the late 19th century, they were upset. His father's family were upset that he married a South Malabar woman. South Malabar wouldn't marry from Kochi. Cochin people wouldn't marry from Travancore. In Travancore, North Travancore wouldn't marry from South. Because everything was localized to such an extent. Dialects changed, the way the communities behave changed, the names of communities sometimes changed. So I have spent a lot of time in Travancore, some time in Kochi, but I can't ever apply that knowledge to Malabar because the dynamics are completely different. Even in the 18th, 19th century, it came under British rule. So there, the way it evolved is very different. It was connected more to Madras and the dynamics coming from there, rather than the princely stuff that was happening in Kochi and Trivandrum.
We do have the Arakkal BV, another...
I've written about the Arakkal BV, which is the only Muslim royal house in Kerala.
We really hope that you would write. I have one more question, if I'm permitted. So I read about this article about the Pattanam village close to Ernakulam, the lost Missouri. Do you believe that it is so, and what is your take on it?
I see no reason to disbelieve it. We'll see. The thing with archaeology is, even with something like Harappa, there are thousands of sites that have been identified, but we don't have the funds to excavate everything. Everything started and left in a certain state. But till we actually get through that, we won't really have clear answers. So I'm happy for them to explore, to find they are unearthing some remarkable stuff there. Whether it is the legendary usurers of what poems and all talk about, that may be open for debate, but the chances are it's adding up to be the same place. What the literature seems to be talking about and the location of the actual thing seems to be the same thing. But we'll only know once the whole project is over and there's some sense of clarity on that. I'm never in a hurry. As I said, history is one of those things where giving a categorical thing is always dangerous because it's always changing, especially archaeology. One thing that's helping now though is genetics. Because increasingly as they are testing the skeletons with DNA and all of that, you're getting fascinating information from that, revelation that in some quarters is causing some unease, but we'll leave that for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is Meera and Andala of the South God are compared together, or they are totally different in their sense? And
pretty different people altogether.
You told about Meera was more to freedom and all. So Andala is about culture, or maybe she also wants freedom.
No, they all seem to express various thoughts. It's just the way they go about it is different. So my illustration, for example, is Janabai. She's expressing the thought, but she doesn't actually do it in real life. Meera expresses and she actually does it also. In the Lingayats, Akka Mahadevi also walks out of the palace and travels naked. There are vachanas which talk about how she was assaulted. Someone tried to assault her even on the road. But she had to live with that. That was the kind of world it was then. So all these women were expressing something original. All these women were standing up to a certain pressure that they were under. The question is they didn't all do it in similar ways. Meerabai actually got out and left. Janabai didn't. And Andal has her own story. There's a Krishnadevaraya, the emperor of Vijayanagar, has done this thing called the Amukta Malayada, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing properly. But there's a nice translation of that as well. And if you read that, you get a nice account of Andal, which is a slightly different thing, much more poetic, much more and older. It's a previous period. It's not the same century or the same time we're talking about. So the preoccupations are different.
And the one I want to know about, the son of two male gods, I want to know more about that.
So as I said, that is when legend and tradition is invented to paper over awkward things, right? So you've adopted a tribal god that belongs to the tribals till the 20th century. Lower caste families and tribals had certain rights at that temple. But when the Brahmins and their Brahminical priests rituals started there, they created genealogy for the god. So in this particular story, what they do is Ayyappan, who was the hill god, is now presented as the son of Mohini and Shiva. Shiva saw Mohini, fell in love, and basically consummated his affection with her. And they had a son who was Ayyappan. So, the person you should read on all of this is a lady called Madhavi Menon. She's done also a book on history of desire in India. And it was in one of her lectures that I remember hearing that not any Indian goddess, no Hindu goddess ever gives birth. Even the ones who have children either create the children, they divine the children. It's never a physical process of giving birth. And I've been looking since then, it's true, not a single goddess seems to have actually physically given birth. So if you look up Madhavi Menon stuff, you'll find very interesting stuff on same-sex elements in Indian mythology, including the illustration here of Shiva and Vishnu having a child like this. There's something there. There's some sort of space there.
You reminded me of O. Chandramenon, who wrote Indulekha. So who are your inspiration for writing?
Oh, this is a tough question because I don't have these romantic notions like inspiration and so on. Different people for different reasons. So, you see a lot of irreverence in my writing. That comes frankly from fiction and P.G. Wodehouse, because as I grew up, I read a lot of Wodehouse, and that really, and seeing the kind of characters we had in the past, and because I don't want historical figures to be treated as holy cows, I bring a certain irreverence and all of that. So as I said, the research is solid and academic, but there's a certain irreverence that I bring in because I want people to calm down a little bit and not look at them as God. So there you have a Wodehouse sort of influence. In terms of accessible writing, when I was growing up, the first person I read who made history fun, as it were, was William Dalrymple with his White Mughals. Similarly, there's a man called Abraham Erali. Abraham Erali has done a series of books, starting with Gem in the Lotus, which is about Harappa and the ancient period, all the way down to the Mughals, and 2 volumes on the Mughals. Stunning. If you want a basic overview of Indian history, Abraham Erali's books are still not matched by anybody else. He does the broad picture really, really well. Then I have the feminist scholars I mentioned, J. Devika, Arunima, Sharda Mani. These scholars are of great interest in bringing that particular perspective to history. And various people, there are women. Ira Mukherjee has now done a book on the Mughal women. We often think of Mughal women basically lounging about in a harem, draped in silks and with their pearls and weighed down by their jewels and all of that. But they were actually diplomats. They were actually women who had a say in politics. Often they, went out when a son would rebel against the father. It was an aunt or a mother or a grandmother who went out and pacified and patched up that situation. It was a contribution. Emperor Humayun, at one of his battles, he loses a 6-year-old daughter who drowns in the river when they are trying to flee the battle scene. What was the 6-year-old girl doing at the battlefield? The point is, these women were there. They were witnesses to what was happening. It was until Akbar's time, the women were all known by their names. Gulbadan Begum, Hamida Banu Begum, their names were known. Akbar is the one who starts turning the women into institutions. Suddenly they're known by their titles. So you have, Mumtaz Mahal, Noor Jahan. These titles are coming in with Akbar. But before that, they had personalities. They chronicled history, they were part of history, and Ira's book does a good job of doing that. And then I also read a lot of slightly polemical writers. For example, Perry Anderson, whose books a lot of people don't agree with, whose argument on India a lot of people don't agree with. They call it ultra-Marxist, ultra-leftist and all of that. But even if you don't agree with it, the advantage of reading something polemical or something very radical and too sharp is that it opens different concepts in your own mind, and you start to learn not to take anything for granted. Because it busts a lot of myths. And for any sort of historical understanding, busting myths is very important. So there, even a polemical writer like Perry Anderson is of importance. There's a scholar called Meera Nanda who's written this book called Prophets Facing Backward. It's about science and society. About how you think science is about principles and it's about the facts and about what this chemical does with that chemical. But social principles, the way a society thinks of itself, ends up affecting science. Fascinating book. And it's slightly academic in its prose, so it may be difficult for a lot of people to get through. But the ideas of great potency and value. So different people give you different kinds of inspiration. And I think it's worthwhile tapping into each person to really to form your own mind and to form a wholesome picture, rather than get carried away with any one inspiration, because at the end of the day, all human beings disappoint.
Thank you, Manu. In 3 books that you've written, I've not read the latest one, but there's a lot of reference to royalty and aristocracy. There are a lot of unsung heroes, women who have contributed not just to the society, but also our history of the country and our independence and everything. Did you ever consider doing some research and writing
somewhat in this 3rd book, where there's everybody from Uddupalli to Annie Besant to a bunch of other characters, but into Nangeli, who people fight about her very existence. Again, one of those things where they say, oh, there's no record on Nangeli. Show me a record on any lower caste person. There is no record. She exists in law, which has value. You can't devalue or claim that has no value. But no, the 3rd book has several such characters covered. But even in the first 2, what really interests me is power and how these people construct edifices of power and how it all comes collapsing down. So it's not reverential to loyalty. And in the first book, the only person I treat with sympathy is Sethu Lakshmi Bai, my protagonist, because her own family, her own people sort of footnoted her. She died in complete obscurity, and it was not something she deserved. That lady's contributions to Kerala were so staggering that someone needed to have told her story well in advance. But she languished as a footnote because she was a woman to begin with, and she ended up backing the minorities and not the powerful elements in society. The result was that she was written out of history. But otherwise, it's slightly irreverential about royalty and their various escapades and their this whole protocol and all of that. So in Trivandrum and Kerala, I've upset a huge constituency of royal supporters by writing this book. But what interests me is power. I'm very interested in how power is built and how power is sustained and how eventually, no matter what you do, power collapses.
And that's very contextual and contemporary as well in the current scenario.
That's the thing. I'm not talking about the contemporary, but all of this is basically hinting at that. When people say, "Oh, our democracy is settled" and all of that, the thing is, if you look at the large span of history, we're a blink of an eye. 70 years is nothing, and it's not settled. And that is why it's important sometimes to stand up and ask questions. That is why it's important when you have certain freedoms on paper to make sure those freedoms are actually enacted in real life. Because if we don't, it will just sit on paper. And tomorrow something will change. Human history is full of things where people thought this was it. Every generation thought this was it, and they'd somehow achieved the pinnacle of whatever. And all those things, went to pieces eventually, and something new emerged. That will happen to us also. But if we want a democratic system to continue, we have to learn to value what we've got. And that, I think, that's what I'm trying to sort of vaguely, indirectly suggest through my thing. I'm not sermonizing. I'm not going there saying, ye acha hai, wo bura hai. What I'm saying is, if you look at history, you draw your own conclusions. Hopefully, they'll be sensible conclusions.
Good afternoon, sir. That was a wonderful talk. Since you mentioned power in the last answer, so a few years ago, I was in a discussion where we ended up discussing this line. One of the panelists said that the gender of power is masculine. So, do you think that since you've mentioned a lot of women in your books, and throughout this talk you've spoken about a lot of women and how they were not written about, basically. And there's also another thing that history was written by powerful men. So, you think that you can question this notion through writing about these women, and also this particular notion that, you know, the gender of power is masculine, and like, what do you?
Yeah, I think
what's
the
your
gender of
take?
power masculine statement in a historical sense has value. It has truth to it. You know, even in the Travancore royal family, when these Maharanis came to power in their own right, when they ruled, for example, Setulashri, by local record, she's called Purara Tridan Maharaja. She's not called Maharani. Maharani is a colloquialism. When she's in power, she's called Maharaja. No matter who sits on the throne, they're called Maharaja. Whether you're a female or a male, it doesn't matter. But the idea is it's a masculine principle. That is what they're sort of emphasizing. But there's enough evidence of people trying to question this throughout history. Akka Mahadevi, in one poem, she says how she's the masculine principle. Where Basava, on the other hand, says that he wants to somehow highlight the feminine in him. So she's talking about the masculine principle there and claiming it for herself. People work with the concepts they have. So if the overarching metaphors, if the general concepts they have are gendered in a certain way, people will first play with that before it's broken down. Now increasingly there's gender bending, now increasingly we're talking about categories not being rock solid, that people can't be put into one box, there's a spectrum and things like that. Now we're opening up these conversations. But for the longest time, the first generation of feminists, etc., they work with the metaphors that were there, because only once you do that can you then move to the next level. So everything is a step-by-step process. And everything takes time. So I think that is the answer to it. But I think there is truth to the fact that power is largely seen as a masculine principle. And that's how even women who negotiated power, you know, we have an obsession with all these women who die at the end of a sword in a battlefield. Because they have, oh, valor, you know, she's a woman, but she went out on a horse and fought a battle. So again, what highlighting any woman who acts in a masculine way, she's a heroine of some sort. A woman who asks an inconvenient question is no heroine, you know. Because that people don't want, but that existing metaphor, they don't want to challenge an existing order, but if a woman fits into another metaphor that's already there without challenging it, happy, clap, clap.
I think it's time to give Manu a clap, and Manu, on behalf of NIFT Bengaluru campus, thank you so much for coming over, patiently explaining to us the nuances of all the three books, the notions of history, challenging the borders in our own minds. And I take this opportunity to thank members of the public who have come in today to the campus. I do insist that you should have a stroll around the campus before you leave. Manu's books are available outside. The latest one is available outside for sale. So do grab your copy and have it autographed by him as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
For hosting this so well. You know, what you probably didn't realize when you started was like a very long-winded answers. For every question I had a 15-minute answer. I must apologize for keeping you all here for about 2 hours. I didn't realize time had gone by that quickly. But thank you.